What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 331. My name is Marshall. I am one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line with hopefully less of a sore throat than he's had the last couple of days, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, how you feeling, sir?
Things are going okay.
No, come on. You back in business, 100%, ready to roll?
Yeah, I'd say about 85%. But
right,
I did delay the show by a couple days, but I think I'm good now.
All right, well, I didn't mind waiting, and I'm glad
the upside is I got to do drafts before doing the show, so it was all in the name of more research.
Wow. Taking one for the team, Luis Scott-Vargas, thank you so much on behalf of our listeners for doing those drafts for work research purposes. Hopefully you open a bunch of sweet rares, because that's what we're talking about on the show this week. We've got the Shadows over Innistrad Rare and Mythic Rare set review this week. And these are, this is the follow-up to the commons and uncommons from last week. All the great rares. These are the ones that are, they're going to define a lot of your drafts and a lot of your sealed pools as well. So they are super important. They don't necessarily define the format, but they certainly help on an individual draft by draft and game by game basis. These things are a big part of the limited landscape, and we're going to go through each and every one of them this week on the show. Before we get into that, just a couple of things to take care of. First and foremost, channelfireball.com. They are the sponsors of this podcast, and we are proud and happy to have them on board as sponsors. If you need Shadows over Innistrad, you can pre-order it right now. You can jump on there, and once they're able to ship it to you, they're going to throw it in the mail, and you will get it as soon as possible. So you can get the latest standard tech. You can get some booster boxes, so you can do some drafts of Shadows with your friends at home, or God forbid, you could just crack it. Don't do that. Get a draft together. It's super easy. And even if you just play some sealed, like that's one thing that I've had a couple of friends I know that wanted to open their booster box, and I talked them into, let's just do a sealed, like you and me, just two people. We'll open up 6 packs each. We'll build a sealed pool, we'll play a few games, and then we'll do it again. And, that works really well. And you just get to learn something and have a fun experience, and you still get those packs opened up so you can get, whatever rares you want. The show is also brought to you by Patreon. That's you, via the Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/limited resources. And you will find a whole bunch of options. You can start off at any amount you want. You can do $1 a show. It doesn't matter. And you'll get a thank you card in the mail. And you also get access to the question of the week thread, as well as early access to a few things. Not the episodes of the podcast. I always put those up at the same time for everybody. But some of the bonus stuff, I've been working on these extra videos. I'll put those up a day or two ahead of time to get some feedback before I send them out into the wild. And a bunch of other cool stuff, all at Patreon. So yes, make sure you check out Channel Fireball. Make sure you check out the Patreon page. Both of those help a lot with keeping the show going and keeping it moving forward. Okay, so before we get into the actual cards, Luis, I want you to go over our grading scale overview. We use an ABCDF grading scale to help put a punctuation mark on the cards, as sometimes that can kind of get lost in the conversation. Conversation is the most important part about the grade, but sometimes you'll hear Luis and I differ on an opinion or get really excited about a card, but when you hear the grade, it helps kind of anchor our opinion and put a little bit of definition around it as far as how good these cards really are. So if you could run us down what the different letter grades mean, Luis, that'd be great.
So the first grade is A. You're going to see more A's and more F's here among the higher rarity cards, because they tend to have the really powerful text boxes and the really strange ones. But we're starting with A, and that is bombs, game winners, cards that are good in many situations, especially when behind, though that is not guaranteed. You can have a great rare that's good while you're ahead, or good at parity and terrible while you're behind. It can still get an A. So you're looking at cards like Gideon, Allied Zendikar, Quarantine Field, Grip of Desolation, Guardian of Tazim. B's are the cards that actively pull you towards their colors. These are your go-to cards, the reasons that you're in a specific color. Often these are cards that you'll be happy to pick up in the first couple picks. They're not quite A's, but they're still quite good. These are your Eldrazi Sky Spawners, Touch of the Voids, Clutch of Currents, Retreat to Emeria type of cards. Mm-hmm. C's are playable. These are, as Marshall famously says, the pawns of limited. They're fairly interchangeable. You need some amount of these. You're going to end up with a lot of C's in your deck, unless your things are going very well or very poorly. And these are kind of the average card. These are your cards that you're not unhappy to play, but you're not overjoyed to play either. Cards like Sheer Drop, Valakut Invoker, Myers Malice. These are sometimes playable, but would prefer not to run them. These are the cards that you're frequently your 22nd or 23rd card, or very situational narrow cards that you don't have a room for a ton of in your deck. So this is cards like Call the Scions, Nirkana Assassin, Eldrazi Devastator. Lastly, we have F. These are virtually unplayable in all scenarios, or incredibly narrow. So cards like Hedron Blade and Salvage Drone. And like I said, we're going to see more Fs than in the common uncommon review. Our other two categories are sideboard, cards that don't almost ever make the main deck, but tend to be pretty good in post-board games. And we're going to talk about cards like Dispel or Plummet in this category. And lastly, we have Build Around. These are cards that you can't put in an average deck and have them do anything or even be good. But if you build around them, they can be quite good. Cards like Colostra Healer, Vampiric Rites, or Molten Nursery.
All right. So that, again, the key here is to focus in on the discussion that we have about each card. That's where you're going to really learn how to break down the card and what we really think about it. But we will use the grades to kind of put a finishing touch on it. All right, so let's get right into the cards here. We're starting with white. Once again, we rotate through which color we start with, but we've rotated all the way through now, and we're back on white. So our first card is Always Watching. And I'm just going to read the cards. If the card's a mythic, I'll point that out. If not, it's just a rare. So I'm not going to say the rarity on each one. It's 1 white for an enchantment. And it says, non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. Ooh, baby.
The first thing I think of is what Gabby said today on Twitter, which is that this should have been called Tangible Virtue, because Intangible Virtue gave all your token creatures +1/+1 in vigilance. So that already gets now that I've realized that, it gets a flavor F. But the actual card here is great. Always Watching
really good.
Is very, very hard to beat. Yes, you're going to sometimes have some tokens, especially in a white, these spirits that don't get the benefit. But giving one of your creatures +1/+1, first of all, that ability alone means that you have a huge advantage going into every long game, and because you get to choose when to play it, you're often going to play it in a turn where you then get 2 good attacks. You've got a 3/3 facing off against another 3/3, and you play this and smash. Vigilance means your opponent can't even race you. They probably don't have good blocks, and they almost assuredly don't have good attacks. So Always Watching is
it's
great.
Very, very strong. Yeah. The truth is, as well, is that since it is non-token, you occasionally miss, like you said, but every other creature in your deck's going to get this. So that's not really a major downside. The one thing that I would keep in mind with Always Watching is to make sure that your creature count is high enough and on the higher side. I usually recommend playing 14 to 18 creatures, somewhere in that range in your average limited deck. And I would want to be on the 16, 17, 18 end of that scale rather than the 12, 13, 14, a little lighter if I had an Always Watching. The way that this card is bad is if you play it and only have one creature, right? They kill your other creature and you just don't have any more going on. That's where Always Watching isn't quite pulling its weight. If you have 2 or more creatures on the battlefield, you're going to be quite happy with an Always Watching. So make sure that you set yourself up to have that happen as often as possible by playing, a few extra creatures, especially when you're building your deck. If there's a 50-50 between, a super mediocre removal spell or a mediocre creature, play the creature.
That being said, Always Watching, I think just a solid A.
I think it's an A also. Like, the fact that it just affects everything means that it asks not that much of you.
And vigilance means that you're not even going to get behind it if you have this, even if you want to attack.
I think this card's great. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Always Watching. I give it an A also. Next is Angel of Deliverance. How do you feel about 8 mana? 6 white for an angel with flying. It's a 6/6. So we've got an 8 mana 6/6 flyer, which I will say is not great, right? An 8 mana 6/6 flyer that's expensive. I would expect to pay 7 mana for that. And that 8th mana comes a lot later in terms of turns during the game. So keep that in mind. But it's got Delirium. Whenever it deals damage, if you've got Delirium, exile target creature an opponent controls. Whew, that's powerful.
It is powerful. It is expensive. 8
is a ton.
8 mana is above the threshold of your normal limited decks get to this mana count. We're not. First of all, we're no longer in Eldrazi world. We're not playing Battle for Zendikar where there's common 7 and 8 drops. We're in a format where Well, some of the time you're going to just play 17 land. And a normal 17 land deck without a bunch of card draw just can't afford 8 mana spells.
No, and when you think about the basic math on that, and I think it is worth it to take a note of that for people that haven't really, you're thinking like, oh, turn 8, turn 9. It doesn't work like that. You're going to need about half of the lands in your deck, right? You're going to need 8 of your 17. So we'll call it roughly half. That means that roughly you will have to have, if you've kept your opening 7, you'll have to have 13 draw steps before, on average, you'll hit that stage. So that's turn 13, depending on whether you're the player that draw. Even if you want to take away or add a couple of turns to that, say turn 11 through 15, you can see that this is not the kind of card that you can just casually throw into any deck and expect to cast on a regular basis. On top of that, if you have your opening hand with an Angel of Deliverance in it, and you're going to be waiting till turn 12, 13, turn 14 before you can actually cast it and get it on the battlefield, you are not going to, that's effectively taking a mulligan in many, many game scenarios. So this 8 mana is really the key to this whole card, because the card itself is very powerful, right? I mean,
it's powerful, but this also isn't an 8 mana win the game. This has to deal damage.
Yes.
If you play Angel of Deliverance and your opponent bounces or kills it, it doesn't do anything. It needs to live to combat, and even when it does, you have to have Delirium, which, granted, at 8 mana is more likely to be the case than not.
And that is a good point there. There will be some percent where you don't.
But this has multiple different hoops. Costs 8 mana, needs to get into a fight. Granted, it can deal damage to a creature, so pretty much any combat it's involved in. But even then, your opponent could like block with a creature, then sacrifice it, and you have to have Delirium. So I think I'm giving Angel Deliverance a D. If you can build your deck to take advantage of it, yes, it will be great. This is one of those kind of tricky grades where the grade doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, totally.
Adding this to your average limited deck is going to be a mistake. Putting this in a late game control deck that has a lot of card draw and defense could be great. In fact, I actually got this card cast against me today, but it didn't do anything. I just killed it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, I'm totally with you on D for this. I think you have to give a nod to the power level. It is a powerful effect in a big body with flying. But if you ignore the setup cost of 8 mana and Delirium, you're not really seeing the whole picture here.
Yeah, so Angel Deliverance, D for Deliverance, unfortunately just costs too much mana, too many hoops.
Yep. This next card is not going to get a D.
Archangel Avacyn is 3 white. She is a mythic. 3 white for a 4/4 legendary angel. Flash, Flying Vigilance. When Archangel Avacyn enters the battlefield, creatures you control get indestructible until end of turn. So this is already a 5 mana 4/4 Flash, Flying Vigilance, which would be great. It also makes your whole team indestructible when you play her, including herself. And she says, when a non-angel creature you control dies, at the beginning of your next upkeep, transform Archangel Avacyn. And when she turns into his Avacyn the Purifier, which is a 6/5 flyer that, when she transforms, deals 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent. Okay, so
this is like a comedy show of awesome.
So first of all, she's a flat A+. There's just
done.
I don't think there's anything you can say about that. Yeah,
no.
Some games your opponent's going to kill her, sure, but the fact that she is first of all aggressively costed at 5 mana 4/4, Flying Vigilance Flash. That card ought to be just an A.
Because you can so often get a 2-for-1 just by casting that card, right?
She also crushes any combat. Like, they attack with 3 creatures. You play Avacyn, she immediately eats a creature, and your other creatures can now, like, double block to kill something, or even single block 2 different things. Or your 1/1 can block their 5/5 and not die. And if somehow one of your creatures dies, she flips over and flame waves. Granted, she does 3 to your other creatures as well, so there are situations where that can be a liability. Mm-hmm. If you have an army of 2/2s and 3/3s, then she flips and kills them all off, that's unfortunate. But still, she's a 6/5 flyer that just hit your opponent for 3. How many life points are they going to be at?
Right. So, and how many creatures do they have left? And how many flyers do they have left? Right? Yeah. Flyers generally have lower toughness. So it's just, yeah. Yeah, this card's a complete joke. Yeah. I've just never... This is one of the most powerful, ridiculously pushed cards I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, even when you're behind, she comes out and blocks with their biggest thing, probably killing it without dying. So, yeah, Archangel Avacyn is just going to get an A+, and if you see her, you should probably take her.
Yeah, it's one of the best cards. I'm just in awe. I mean, imagine if I went back to when you first started playing Magic and I said, here's a card. You just wouldn't believe it. You know, you wouldn't believe that there could be that much awesome text on one card. This next card, this is my kind of rare here, Luis. It's called Bygone Bishop. And I get it. Archangel Avacyn is like one of the poster cards for the set, and she's kind of one of the main characters, and so they wanted to push it, and it's a mythic, and it's awesome. But Bygone Bishop, these are the kind of rares I really appreciate because they're much more subtle. They're powerful, but they're not the kind of card that you see and you're like, well, can't never win the game now. 2 and a white for a 2/3 flying spirit cleric, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, investigate. So you get a clue token. And this kind of card is very balanced, right? Like it's 3 mana, 2/3 flyer, which is like thumbs up. That's solid. You would play that, even without any other text. And then, you're going to get a little value, by casting some smaller creatures or middle-sized creatures after you cast the bishop, by getting a few clue tokens. And I think this card's just like straight up thumbs up across the board.
Yeah, Bygone Bishop's great. You're not paying much of a cost for all the upsides. Again, like you said, 3 mana, 2/3 flyers is just good. And you're going to pick up a couple of clues, and those clues are going to draw you into more creatures that can get you more clues. It's also not like a deck building challenge. Most decks are going to play a bunch of creatures that cost 3 or less.
Right.
Or so I've heard, at least.
Exactly. So, I want to give Bygone Bishop like a B or maybe a B+. Like this is not the type of card that's going to come down and just dominate a board state, but it's the type of card that, it makes you want to play this color. Like if you see this in your sealed pool or if you open it, you'll be like, ooh, I'll take a Bygone Bishop. I can play white and try to go off or whatever. So I'll say B+ for Bygone Bishop just because I like it a lot.
Yeah, B+ seems fine. But a 3 mana, 2/3 flyer that's going to draw you some cards. That's good for Bygone Bishop.
Declaration in Stone is next. It is 1 and a white for a sorcery, and it says exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. So we'll keep that in mind that we're playing limited here, and it's not going to be too often that you have the same creature with the same name. But it also says that player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. So a 2 mana sorcery that can kill any creature that it can target, including things with indestructible. Like this thing just gets rid of a creature and occasionally will even get rid of an extra one. But they kind of get a card back. So you're not really, in a traditional removal sense, up a card even on cards like you would be. You're actually giving your opponent a card back, but you get to be the one to pick, which creature to kill.
You're down a card. You're up a decent amount of mana because, first of all, you spent 2 mana to presumably kill something worth more than 2. You're often casting this on, 4 or 5 drop. And your opponent has to spend 2 more mana to crack the clue open to get their card. That's good. This card is worth... Think about it as a bounce spell, but instead of them getting the creature back in their hand, they get a clue, which is going to be a lot worse, a random card. So even though you're ultimately down a card, you still are, again, up enough mana and you've dropped their card quality enough that it's still a very good deal. It also does nuke tokens.
They do have a name, right? Because I know that morphs and manifests don't have a name, but tokens do, right?
Right. When your opponent has 4 spirit tokens out, this kills all 4 of them. This exiles all 4 of them, and they don't get any clues because they only investigate for non-token. So this wipes out a whole board of spirits at the best value possible. So it's great against those cards. And you might think, well, you're killing tokens, not real creatures, but if they have 2 or 3 tokens, they probably spent a card on that.
Yeah, especially the spirit tokens, right? Because those are very annoying.
And overall, that's going to be plenty of value. Especially exiling also means that, there's not in their graveyard for delirium or for any other graveyard shenanigans.
Yeah, those things
permanently gets rid of the zombies that bring themselves back. This destroys all the zombie tokens very well. There are cards that make lots of zombie tokens. So the fact that this is a token-heavy limited meta game, and that even though you're going to be down a card in some situations, you're up enough mana and, again, up card quality because you're going to use... This isn't a dead weight, right? This isn't a card I'm going to cast on turn 2 very often.
Right.
But it's a card that can kill any creature. It can kill their 6/6. So I think Declaration of Stone... I would also give Declaration of Stone a B+. I'm not to the point where I want to give it an A just because you are down a card, but it's still very, very good. I would always take this card early and I would always play it.
Yeah, I agree with B+. The key here being unconditional. You have to pay for that. You do. You got to pay for that, but it's worth paying for. Next is Descend Upon the Sinful. This sounds really important. 4 white for a sorcery. It's a mythic rare. It says exile all creatures. Now, there's also a Delirium here that says put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield if you have Delirium. So there's a couple of things to note about Descent Upon the Sinful. One of them is that it costs 6 mana, and we're used to our sweepers or wrath effects, as we call them, costing 5 more recently, and before that costing 4 mana. This one costs 6. It's not cheap. That said, it exiles all creatures, which is an incredibly powerful effect in Limited, and in Constructed for that matter. The other thing to keep in mind is you should be taking note that this card exists, right? When I think about a new format, there's a whole bunch of little checkboxes that go in my head about this set. And because there's so many interchangeable parts that you'll see patterns set to set. What's the red burn spell at common look like? Is it an instant? Is it sorcery? Does it deal 3? Does it deal 2? Does it have a rider? Does it not do anything? Is there a wrath in the format? Not every Limited format actually has a full-on sweeper like this. And this checks that box of, yes, there is a full-on, if you overextend, you will occasionally, this is a mythic rare, let's remember, get fully punished for that by Descend Upon the Sinful. So the question I have for you, Luis, is clearly super powerful, right? Exile all creatures is insane. And some percentage of the time, you're even going to get a 4/4 angel left over, which is just absurd. So we know that the power level's there. What about the 6 mana? Does that matter to you? Does that concern you?
Well, it definitely does. If this didn't have the Delirium text, I would not like the card a ton. Okay. It would still be powerful. It would still be a card that you would play, but not in every white deck. And it would still be something you had to keep in mind and you could build towards. But I'm not a huge fan of expensive wraths in Limited.
Yeah, that is the question, right?
And the reason is the way you get a value of this card, pretty obviously, is, again, we're ignoring the Delirium clause for now. We're just looking at the 4 white exile creatures. Mm-hmm. You exile more of their creatures than yours.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. That is a good plan. The problem is when you had old wraths, right, like Supreme Verdict or Day of Judgment, these like 2 white, 4 mana total wraths, if you don't play a 2-drop, your opponent, let's say your opponent plays a 2-drop, you don't play a 2. Next turn they hit you and play a 3-drop, you don't play a 3. They don't immediately think like, oh, they have to have a wrath. They think like, oh, my opponent kept a slow hand, hit you, play another creature, then you go turn 4 wrath and you win the game.
You win the game because you get a 3-for-1.
You 3-for-1. When you have Descend Upon the Sinful, you can't go. First of all, you'll die.
You'll die.
Especially in a format with werewolves. That makes it even more punishing.
Oh, God, yeah. Wow. That's a great point.
Second of all, your opponent's going to get more suspicious, so they'll play around it. They're like, well, it doesn't increase my clock to play the 4th creature. I'm just not going to do that. I might not even play the 3rd. Again, werewolves really help here. So 6 mana wraths, you either have to play into them, in which case that they're worth less, or you have to just be way too obvious about it. So I don't love 6 mana wraths. So if it was just that, I would think this card is kind of poor. I mean, still, again, well, kind of poor is an exaggeration. It would still be okay, but it wouldn't be great. It would definitely not be a bomb. However, with Delirium, if you can reliably get Delirium, getting a 4/4 Angel to kick things off is huge.
It's so huge.
Because not only is the board cleared, you also got, first of all, a 2-for-1 like intrinsically, right? Like where this card is doing 2 different things, one of which, even if it's even, you're still up like on board presence because then you're up a card with the angel and you're the first person on the scene. Second of all, it's just a much higher payoff because another thing about expensive wraths is you spend the turn wrathing and then they untap and play 2 more creatures. And then now you're behind again because they got the first crack at an empty board.
Yeah, that's a soapbox thing I've been on for a long time is that people seem to forget that part of it. And this just erases that, at least some of the time.
And this leaves this Descend Upon the Sinful in the place where if you can assemble Delirium, then it's going to be an excellent card, truly excellent. If you have a very low chance of assembling Delirium, you really need to be like a control deck before this interests you because it's horrible in an aggro deck. This is not the 6-drop you want. And it's even a little sketchy in some mid-range decks. So, yeah, I would still play it in mid-range. It's just such a good reset button, but it's not a bomb unless you can get the Delirium going. If you're playing like a white-blue deck that has a bunch of different ways to discard, to put cards in your graveyard, to get Delirium, you have some artifacts. You have like the Wicker Scarecrow is especially good, the 1/4 that searches for 2 lands. That's the perfect card for this because it blocks, gets you Delirium, and gets you lands number 5 and 6.
Yeah, oh yeah.
but then this card's going to be one of your better cards. So it's really a deck building challenge. That all being said, I think Descent of Sinful's an A. I think that if you can meet those challenges, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a build around, because you can put this in a lot of white decks and it will be passable just because it has high moments.
Yes.
So actually, it's enough of a deck building challenge. I think I actually give it a B. So all right, Descend upon the Sinful, I will give it a B. If your deck can reliably Delirium and you're a good control deck well suited to take advantage of this, it does move into A territory.
Yeah, I was going to give it a B plus just because of the insane ceiling on it, but don't be surprised if you do die. One piece of advice too, it's my guess that you're going to want to be a little more aggressive with your Descend upon the Sinful than you would with a normal Wrath. If you can make a fairly equitable, exile everything and leave yourself with the 4/4 White Angel, I think that you're probably want to do that. One thing I've noticed about the format here in the early stages is that the board state as it sits doesn't always look the same way after you've passed your turn back to your opponent, thanks to Madness and Werewolves, is that your opponent's board can look quite a bit different than it did when you said your turn. And so I would be like, they can't Madness in response to this, right? They can't Madness in a creature because they'll just end up losing.
Oh, they can. It's just not very effective.
Yeah, like if they're using a creature that has a loot ability or whatever.
Like if they have a reckless scholar in play, they can't stack up the Madness and then let Wrath resolve.
And so if they have another way, sure. But anyway, I think I'm going to be a little aggressive with Descend upon the Sinful because, look, the 4/4 flyer is legit. I mean, that is a major card. Like, that's a real, you would pay 5 mana to 6 mana for that card. Like, if you just made it, you cost it for me, Luis. What's a 4/4 White Angel worth in mana? 5? 5.5?
If you're putting it in your deck for 5 mana, it's going to be just like a solid card.
Yeah, like a B, right?
Yeah.
So
at this point, I'm starting to think that 5 mana for flyer is probably like B minus, just because cards are so
BB minus just on its own, right? And so if you're paying an additional mana for that and can ensure the fact that your opponent has no board state, I think that I'm down to take that offer. So, all right, let's move on to Drogskull Cavalry. Another expensive one here, Luis. This one's 5 white, so 7 total mana for a 4/4 with flying. It's a Spirit Knight. Yikes! That is not good. We need to see some pretty impressive extra text on this. So it says, whenever another spirit enters a battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life. Sure, but it's got the activated ability of 3 and a white. Put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So pretty nice little sequence here, right? You hit, your 7th mana, you play your Drogskull Cavalry. It's passable as a 4/4 flyer, but not for the price. The 7 mana does not justify that. Then on your turn, you can pay 4 mana to make a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying and gain 2 life. And if you hit that next land drop, you can do it twice already and start gaining 4 life a turn while creating 2 1/1 spirits to go along with your already 4/4 flyer. And I think that we can see how that game would go. You should be able to run away with that game at any type of parity or a head situation, and even a little bit behind. I think if you're getting trounced, it probably won't save you. But, even if you're a bit behind, the Drogskull Cavalry can get you out of it. The issue here that I can't ignore here, though, is the 7, right? 7 mana. Man, that's a lot of mana. This card's slow. It's slow to get down on the battlefield and it's slow to get rolling, but it does have the ability to stabilize and then take over a board on its own, which I can certainly appreciate.
It's funny that the same game as Angel Deliverance got cast against me, so did Drogskull Cavalry.
Good
and
God.
Then I couldn't kill the Cavalry, and while the Cavalry did in fact arrive, I lost badly to it. Well, once you start putting 2 1/1 flyers and gaining 4 a turn, plus having this 4/4 in play,
it's just absurd.
It's just really hard to get damage through. So, Drogskull Cavalry has all the weaknesses of a 7-drop that doesn't. It's not gonna say it doesn't affect the board because it puts a 4/4 flyer into play, but it has all the weaknesses of a 7 that doesn't interact well against bounce or removal. If you play this and then your opponent bounces it, you got nothing out of it. It doesn't have enter the battlefield effect or anything like that.
Exactly.
But if you untap with it, you just win. I mean, there's not very many boards where you will lose if you have the ability to do this. So I think that given that, I would say that Drogskull Cavalry, I think I would give it a B minus. It's so tough. Maybe it's just a B. It's just such a high reward if you win.
It is.
Or if you untap
if you get to do it, and the ability to drag yourself out, like, those boards where you've just barely stabilized, this thing takes you from being just barely stable to being ahead quite quickly and makes sure that your life total's high enough so that you don't get killed. Like, it does pull you out from being behind. It just does it in a kind of not super efficient way.
Well,
it's probably a B. Like, look, just think of it like this. It's a finisher on a control deck, right? Like, it's a 7-mana spell. Well, it's a perfectly good thing to cast if you're able to make the game go long, and I think it'll reward
what I also
you.
like is that it's a card that can single-handedly win a game. So even if you had it in like an aggro deck, like as your one card that costs more than 5 mana, you could just be completely losing, and then you just play this, then all of a sudden your opponent's like, well, I actually can't kill you anymore, and you're just going to get an army of spirits. Mm-hmm. So I'm not advocating putting a bunch of 7-drops in your aggro deck. I'm just saying that cards that can win the game by themselves are worth paying attention to.
Yeah, definitely. And in sealed as well, this thing could definitely win its fair share of games. I'm going to give it a B.
All right, I like B for Jogskull Cavalry, which brings us to Eerie Interlude. This is 2 and a white for an instant. Exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step.
So you're exiling your own creatures.
Not all of them. Ghostway was...
Any number of them, is that?
Any number of them. Like the previous version of this, Ghostway, which, funnily enough, is similar in theme, was just all your creatures. This doesn't do that, which is nice, because you don't have to exile your own tokens, and you can just choose the creatures that have decent abilities, or you need to save from removal or what have you.
This is the kind of card I typically do not like.
No, this card... Without having specific combos in your deck, this isn't really a card I want to play, because yes, it triggers enters the battlefield effects, but
that's the line for me. Like where do you draw the, like, what do you mean by specific combo? Do you just mean getting value out of enter the battlefield, or do you mean I
mostly mean that. If you have 7 or 8 creatures somehow with good enter the battlefield effects, this gets a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
But even then, I'm not super excited about it.
Right.
It is a great sideboard card against enchantments. Your opponent's putting sleep paralysis or bound by Moonsilver on your creatures.
Even a dead weight if your
a non-lethal dead weight.
Yeah.
And of course you can cast this in response to just normal removal, though.
Yeah.
At 3 mana, that's not great. So
no, you can set up. I mean, there is flexibility here, right? Like all these little things, like you said, you can cast this in response to removal. Is that the draw for the card? No, but it is something that you have to chalk it up to. Well, you will occasionally blank a removal spell with this, right? Another thing you can do is you could set up a bunch of blocks and then blink your creatures to be able to block again, right? Like chump blocks and then stay alive for a turn, right? Is that a big deal? No, that you would never play a card for that reason. But when that situation does pop up, there's another little check mark for Eerie Interlude. The question is, do all the check marks add up to a good card? And my guess is no. My guess is that they probably don't.
Yeah, I'm going to give Eerie Interlude a D.
Yeah, I think it's a D. I want to see what people do cool stuff with it. I just think that, game in and game out, Eerie Interlude is not likely to be, a big winner.
No. It's also a decent sideboard card against those enchantments. Or
I do like that.
Or against a Wrath. You can cast this in response to Descend Upon the Simple. And
right, because they don't come back until the end step?
Right. Ooh. Next up, we've got Handweir Militia Captain. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 human soldier. And this is a flip card, and the ability on the front side is just, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform Handweir Militia Captain. So 1 and a white for a 2/2. Mm-hmm. A fine start. And then on your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creatures, including itself, so 3 other creatures, transform into Westvale Cult Leader. This has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. Presumably that's at least 4 because it got transformed, though right. it is dynamic, so as you get more creatures or lose creatures, it'll change. Also, it says at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield. Hey, Handweir Militia Captain's great.
This card's awesome.
Yeah, it's a 2-drop that you can just play on turn 2, and functions as a 2-drop, can attack for a couple points of damage. Later in the game, it flips pretty easily. It's not that hard to get 4 creatures in play, especially with tokens.
Yeah, no mana cost, no tap things. It just happens once you hit that point.
And then you end up with like a 7/7 that becomes an 8/8 as you get another token. You get a token every turn, and the Militia Captain keeps growing. So Handweir Militia Captain just all around great card.
I think it's really solid. It also fits that description that I was talking about with the Bygone Bishop of not a card that's broken, but a card that's powerful and interesting, but you can interact with it, right? This isn't Avacyn, but for 2 mana, it's hard to imagine getting much of a better deal than Handwear Militia Captain. You're already starting at a reasonable floor of 2/2 for 2. And for no extra mana invested, just playing your cards and doing your thing, the card can become a card that is a must deal with and can overwhelm the game going both vertically, right? It be, like you said, can become a huge threat in and of itself. And also horizontally, it just spits out a bunch of tokens, again, with no extra mana investment whatsoever. So I'm a big fan of the Handwear Militia Captain. It asks so little of you and gives back so much, which is, that's very attractive in a rare.
Definitely. And I don't think you do much better than this. Again, for 2 mana, it's a must kill that's good early and great late. So yeah. I think Handwear Militia Captain gets an A-.
I have it at A- also. It doesn't have that over-the-top punch that we give our A's, but the efficiency is absolutely here. And this is a card that has to be killed. It just does. Your opponent just cannot ignore this card for the duration of the game, period.
That brings us to Odric, Lunarch Marshal. 3 and a white.
Oh, sorry.
Is it Odric?
It is Odric. I was just responding to my name, but
no, it's first of all, it's only 1 L. Second of all, not every card named Marshall has anything to do with you.
Would this one even make the top 8 Marshals?
You wouldn't even make the top 8 Marshals.
I didn't make the top 8 Marshals.
All right, Odric, Lunarch Marshal. I have to ask you about pronunciation on these things. 3 and a white for a 3/3.
Autumnal.
Legendary creature, human soldier. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn if a creature you control has first strike. The same is true for everything else, all the keywords.
Right, flying, death touch, etc. Okay, so vanilla test real quick, 3/3 for 4 mana, not exciting, right? We like the Handwear Militia Captain because the floor we said was pretty good at 2/2 for 2. 3/3 for 4 is a little worse than that. It's like not that exciting. So Odric, how often does Odric have friends that matter here? Right? How many creatures in your average draft deck or sealed deck have either flying, death touch, double strike, blah, 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 blah. The one that jumps out to me, Luis, is flying. Right? Flying is one of the best abilities, period. And in white, especially with spirit tokens, you're going to often have a random flyer on the board. And if that's the case, then I think Odric all of a sudden looks a lot better, right? Because it gives everybody that, right? At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain, blah, blah, blah. So if you have a flyer, your whole team gets flying. Am I reading that right?
Yes. Not only does your whole team gain flying, this works at the beginning of combat, even the first turn you play Odric.
Oh, so, great point. Yeah. Ooh.
So even if you're not getting haste, which would be kind of nice, if you just play Odric because you have 1 flyer and 3 other creatures, all of a sudden you get a bunch of flyers and you get to smash in, and the same is true for all the other abilities. Having an immediate impact, it does make this card more appealing.
Yes. But I'm breaking it down and I'm looking at flying and thinking that's amazing. Death touch doesn't seem as amazing. Double strike it comes up very rarely. Haste would be nice, like you said, but isn't super amazing. Hexproof is kind of like, I don't think that matters for combat that much. Indestructible would be nice, but it's hard to find indestructible creatures. Lifelink would be pretty good as long as your creatures can attack. Menace, sure. Reach doesn't do anything, because you're attacking. Or is it each combat? Oh, it's each combat. Okay, so you can block with all of your creatures if one has reach?
It is good defensively.
Okay, so that's a thing. Skulk, Trample, and Vigilance are the rest of them. Like I said, the one that really stands out to me is Flying, as the one that's easiest to set up for the highest upside.
Odric, you really just need to figure out not only how many creatures you have with the ability, but how many creatures you have total. Because giving a bunch of 1/1 spirits, flying doesn't do anything. You need to figure out the creatures that actually benefit. So you actually want to have this mix of creatures with abilities, creatures that have stats but don't necessarily have abilities that will benefit from them. Mm-hmm. Like imagine if you had Farbog Revenant, the 1/3 lifelink Skulk. That card is awesome with Odric because
oh wow, you get both.
You get both, and those are really good abilities. Mm-hmm. Giving a bunch of 3/3s lifelink. I mean, the Skulk part less relevant, but the lifelink in particular is very, very good. So this is a hard card to evaluate. My assumption is that Odric is good.
My assumption is that too. This isn't the kind of card I love, but I think that if you have an Odric, you're going to take it fairly early. I think you're going to play it every time, even if you don't have a lot of this going on, and you're going to give yourself a pretty big advantage if you hit the right creature at the right time.
A 4-mana 3/3, not as appealing as a 2-mana 2/2, but still, it's hard to have a fail case here. And a lot of creatures in the set have these abilities. You can find plenty of commons that'll have appealing abilities to throw in your creatures. So I think Ojik is a solid B.
Yeah, I think he's going to end up being a B as well. And there's going to be blowouts, right? I mean, there's going to be times where you're like, oh my God, my opponent's creatures just had double strike, indestructible, lifelink, and flying or something. And you're like, oh wow, okay. All right, let's move on to Thalia's Lieutenant. Thalia's Lieutenant is 1 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier. When Thalia's Lieutenant enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. So you are getting a 1/1 for 2 here, which is not great. We have a humans payoff. We mentioned the creature types in the common and uncommon set review, and there are a lot of humans in the set for sure. And Thalia's Lieutenant, affects those all nicely. Interesting little back and forth here that Thalia's Lieutenant, you think, wow, only costs 2 mana. But playing Thalia's Lieutenant on turn 2 is rarely going to be the thing that you want to do, as Thalia's Lieutenant is just a 1/1 when you play it. Now, if you do go human, Thalia's Lieutenant ends up being like a 4/4. But my guess is that you'll try to sequence it out so that you have as many humans on the battlefield first and then play Thalia's Lieutenant. That seems to be a bigger upside to me than making like a Thalia's Lieutenant like a 4/4 over the course of the game.
Yeah, certainly is, because the tokens have haste.
Effectively, the creatures have haste. Yeah.
You want to give you get to put a bunch of ++1 counters on creatures that can already attack, as opposed to later getting that value.
Exactly, and your opponent's going to know that your Lieutenant could be bigger for the next turn. This card seems to be build-around-ish, right? Like, if you're not playing humans, I don't think that you want this in your deck at all. But I could see it being a pretty powerful build-around for the humans deck.
Thalia's Lieutenant's a great card. If you have this, even so many creatures are humans that if you were to take the average white-green deck, not drafted to be humans, and then just add Thalia's Lieutenant, it's going to be a good card in that deck.
You're going to get there? Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So it's really hard to fail here. Also, you don't need, if you get 2 +1/+1 counters out of the deal, it's, let's say you play Thalia's Lieutenant and you make one of your creatures slightly bigger, then you play another human later. You paid 2 mana for 3/3 worth of stats. And that's like one of the tamer cases. Mm-hmm. So Thalia's Lieutenant's very good.
Okay, that seems solid. But you do need to be green, white, or humans based deck. Right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be green. You can be white plus any other color. Green's the initial best one. But red white's fine, because a lot of the werewolves are human on their front side, though not when they're flipped. And then black white still has some humans. So overall, I would say that Thalia's Lieutenant starts as a B+ for me, because it has a really high upside, and then near the end of it, it could end up either like dropping down to around a B-, C+, sometimes even worse if you end up with like 2 other humans in your deck. The card's just not playable. Mm-hmm. But in a deck with 12 or 13 humans, Thalia's Lieutenant's going to be an A.
Yeah, I was going to give Thalia's Lieutenant a build around B+. I think it's just because you just can't jam it into any deck, right? You do need to at least get a creature count going. Like the card loses effectively all of its value if you don't have humans. So you do need to at least check to make sure that you're, hit some type of critical mass for Thalia's Lieutenant to be playable, which to me signifies build around. Yeah,
I'm willing to give Thalia's Lieutenant a build around B+, but bear in mind it's a very light build around. It doesn't require
much. Yeah, it's going to naturally fit most of the time. All right, so that's it for white. Pretty cool mix, I think, for the white rares of raw power. Archangel Avacyn might be the best card in this set, probably is. Descent upon the Sinful, a big swingy play, but also some of the more middle ground type rares like Drogskull Cavalry, Hanweir, Militia Captain, the Bygone Bishop, Thalia's Lieutenant. These kind of cards that are there, and also Always Watching is one I think that's going to be really good. Okay, let's move on to blue, Luis. The first one, God, this card's sweet. I've got a chance to play with this one already. It's called Confirm Suspicions, and it's 3 blue for an instant. It says counter target spell. Now, pausing right here, normally I would be pretty out on this. A 5-mana counter spell is not where you want to be in limited generally, but this one has extra text that says investigate 3 times. You just spew clue tokens all over the battlefield when you counter something. So
I like to think of it as you lighting up, whatever creature is in the picture, and then clues dropping out like a video game. Like,
yeah, I mean,
ding,
that is
ding,
the
ding.
idea behind the card.
Yeah.
The flavor text says everyone has something to hide. Well, some people have 3 somethings to hide, and I'm into it. I actually like this card. If you're facing down a super aggressive deck, it's going to be too slow and clunky probably to suit you. But in sealed or in a control deck, I like Confirmed Suspicions because you just can't deny that, right? I mean, you're getting a 3-for-1 kind of.
Well, Deny Suspicions is the obvious counter to Confirmed Suspicions.
Confirmed Suspicions, yes. Right, so I don't know. I like it.
This isn't Ancestral Recall. This is a 3-for-1. So.
It is straight up Ancestral Recall. This card is not that great, but it's good.
There are some forces making it better.
Mm-hmm.
One is that blue has a lot of instants, and
yes,
it has ways to spend your mana on your opponent's turn. Especially one of the features of Madness decks is that if you have some Madness outlets that let you discard on your opponent's turn and play Madness cards, you have more of a reason to keep mana up, which does 2 things in favor of Confirmed Suspicions. One is it makes you less suspicious. If you have let's say a Reckless Scholar in play and your opponent knows you have Madness cards in your deck, if you pass with 5 mana up, they're not going to immediately think they have Confirmed Suspicions. They're going to think, all right, they're going to Madness some kind of creature. Yep. The second is that if your opponent does play around Confirmed Suspicions, they don't play into it, you can then Madness out that creature or use your mana in that way.
Right.
So clues also help here.
That's a great one.
If you pass with 2 clues in play and 5 mana, again, it conceals what you have to some degree, though the fact that you didn't crack it on your turn does mean something. But again, even if your opponent does play around it, you just draw your 2 off your clues and go on your way.
Yeah.
So, Confirmed Suspicions has some advantages. It is a 5-mana spell. It is a counter spell that your opponent can play around. Those things are bad. But it's a pretty big advantage if you do resolve it.
It really is. Like, if you're looking to grind and you're looking to go long game and you have the defensive cards and the removal spells, I think the first Confirmed Suspicions going into your deck is quite good. I think the second one loses a lot of its luster. Like, having 2 of these in your hand could be a little bit disastrous if your opponent's playing like 2 drops and 3 drops and madnessing things. But like I said, I like the first one. I'm not going to go super high on it. I was going to give it a B- just because I really do think that getting 3 cards is just insane in these grindy decks where, look, if you can get to 5 mana with Confirmed Suspicions up and you're either at parity or ahead in any capacity, then this card's great. I mean, it's going to hold off the threat that you need to hold off from their hand, and you're going to just pull ahead in the late game thanks to all the cards. So I'm going to go B- on Confirmed Suspicions.
All right. I'm going to give it a C+. I think that it's going to be great sometimes, but it's going to be really bad sometimes as well.
Yeah. You're definitely dying with that card in your hand when you sign up to play it. Engulf the Shore is 3 and a blue for an instant. Return to their owner's hand all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. The key here being that this is an instant also, that's a absolutely critical part of Engulf the Shore. Because you can, potentially end step this.
That makes it very different than a lot of the, we've seen the cards like this. We've seen a bunch of rares in the last, 3 or 4 sets. There's like 1 per set that has this effect. This being an instant is a game changer because now you play it at any of your opponent's turn and you get the first shot at replaying all the creatures. That being said, this takes a lot of work to get going.
It really does. And there's going to be times when you don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like if you're just ahead on board, Engulf the Shore is kind of like rip it up and throw it away. If you're behind, it doesn't really solve the problem permanently, though you might get rid of some tokens or something with an aura on it that you didn't want. I don't know. I appreciate the fact that it's an instant and there's going to be, it's going to be very situationally amazing, but my gut says that the average case scenario for Engulf the Shore is that you have to really kind of maneuver a board state in a pretty awkward way. Remember, you have to have enough islands so that you're actually returning the things that you want to return. If you return all the small things and leave them with their 6/6 or whatever, that's not really getting you where you need to go. And like I said, in any scenario where you're ahead, Engulf the Shore just looks terrible. Like it's just not what you want to be doing.
There is a way to break the symmetry, which is because this keys off of toughness. if you have like all X5s and 4 islands, it can bounce all their creatures and keep all yours.
That's true. That is true.
Get
in there with your 1/5 flyers.
Look, this card's really weird. There's a lot going on here. You know, you have to have enough islands. You have to have the creatures that line up correctly. I'm not sure how to evaluate this card, but I'm going to start it at it not being very good.
Yeah, that's where I think it's going to end up.
It just feels like too much has to go right, even though the picture is very sweet. There's like an octopus hiding in the waves. Or,
it's beautiful.
Or an Emrakul or whatever. But I'm going to start by giving Engulf the Shore.
I'm going D on it.
I think I just have to give it a D.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a D.
Bear in mind, this is one of the ones that's in some decks might be great, and it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where this is going to land, but I think we're going to start at D for Engulf the Shore.
Yeah, well, the key here, right, is that what Luis and I try to do is come up with the average case scenario. We can both come up with an easy scenario where it's amazing, right? And we can also both
we're both good at thinking optimistically.
We are, but we could also sit here and come up with scenarios where it's terrible, or where it's just a card you just stone wouldn't want to cast from your hand, and those come to my mind pretty easily as well. So the reality is that Engulf the Shore will be cast in all of these different scenarios. And what we have to figure out for the purposes of card evaluation is, well, what about the average? Like, is it, and that way maybe you can sideboard it in when you know it's going to be good or in the right deck or whatever.
It could kill spirit tokens quite nicely.
Yeah, it does. So, all right, let's move on to Epiphany at the Drown Yard. I've already had a chance to play with this one. I actually like it quite a bit. It's blue and an X for an instant. And it says, reveal the top X+1 cards of your library and separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile into your hand and the other one into your graveyard.
Well, since you have played with this, what was your experience with it?
So it's an interesting card because it does afford you card advantage. The longer you go into the game, the more it does so. It is not fact or fiction. Don't think of it like that. It's much more along the lines of a steam augury that's flexible. The fact, so it says reveal the top X+1. So like if you just walk through sort of the normal progression of it, if you play, X equals 2, then you're going to reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent, and you put them into 2 piles. You get to do that. So you say, okay, I'll put 1 good card here and 2 mediocre cards here. An opponent chooses which pile you get. They choose which pile you get. Now, the easy thing to say is, well, I don't care, right? Like I'm either getting my good card or 2 cards and I'll take either one. And I think that the higher the value of X is, the more that's true. But you have to pay credence to the fact that your opponent gets to choose the pile and will just straight up never give you what you want. You're never going to get exactly what you want from Epiphany at the Drown Yard, unless you get incredibly lucky. So, for the most part, it's just a way to get raw cards going into your hand, even though they're not really necessarily the ones that you'd want. My experience with playing with it was that it was still worth it. You are still able to grind out people. If the average card quality in your deck is quite high, you're going to set the piles up so that they have to give you something. It's going to be the lesser something, but you're going to get something because you're setting the piles. And the fact that it scales with the game is huge. I mean, if you play Epiphany at the Drown Yard X equals 5 and you make 2 piles of 3 cards, your opponent's giving you something good. Like there's no way in most 6 card piles that you're going to be able to, make 2 piles, however you decide to break them up, where your opponent can't hook you up with something. So I like the fact that it does that. There's some neat little things with this card too, in that it's an instant and it can get you to delirium pretty quickly. You could even do it for just blue mana and just reveal the card, have your opponent put it in your graveyard as well as Epiphany at the Drown Yard. That's not something I expect to see, but it's like a little niche case scenario that'll come up. And if you need instant speed delirium, you could probably get it, if you were close to it already. So overall, look, I appreciate the card. I think it's good. I would play it in any blue deck and I'd probably draft it, fairly aggressively. That said, it isn't quite what it seems on the surface as far as just like, oh, it's a big card advantage engine. It's not quite that.
There's some interesting stuff going on here. If you flip a great card and a couple medium ones, you can split it like 1 versus 3. Mm-hmm. You're not going to, if you're digging to a specific piece of removal to kill their 6/6 flyer, you're just not going to get it. They're just not going to let you have that. But if you cast this for like 4 or 5 in the middle of the game, and you can go spell land versus spell land, something along those lines, or spell land versus spell, you're going to get 2 cards out of it, 3 cards out of it.
Totally. And it scales well. I mean, I found myself waiting for it as long as possible. I just wanted to get that number up as high as I could.
A card that you can cast for value for 2 mana and for 8 mana is good. It is good to have those options. I'm still not seeing this being particularly special, though. It's the fact that it can't dig you to exactly what you need makes this a little bit more limited than a normal card draw spell. Agreed. Like, look at something like Pour Over the Pages, right? The draw 3, discard 1, untap 2 lands.
Yep.
That will dig you to exactly what you're looking for. I mean, maybe it only looks at the top 3 cards instead of the top 7, but at least if it's there, you're going to get to keep it. Whereas if you're looking for a specific card, Epiphany won't get you there. So I'm going to give Epiphany the Drowned Yard. I'll probably give it a B minus.
I give it a B minus also. I think that's right where it sits. And again, I do recommend waiting if you can. One of the big points of it is that it's flexible, so do it when you need to. But if you can wait, you probably should, because the more cards you just get on the table, the harder the decision is for your opponent.
So you're saying X spells are better when the X is greater?
Yes, and I would actively wait as long as possible with Epiphany of the Drowned Yard.
Epiphany of the Drowned Yard gets a B minus, which leads us to Forgotten Creation.
Yeah, it's 3 and a blue for a 3/3 zombie horror with Skulk. It's weird seeing Skulk on the higher powered creatures, like a 3/3.
It's almost like a throwaway. Like, yes, it does matter, but it's a very different meaning.
Right. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard all the cards in your hand, which I'd like to turn down that invitation. But there's more. It says, if you do, draw that many cards.
All right, I would like to turn it up.
Yeah, that's actually very good, right?
Oh, this is a great ability.
It's weird, but it's good. This reminds me of a card that I drafted and didn't play in the Streamer Showdown for Ravnica called Mind Moil. Yeah.
It's all or nothing. So if your hand has 2 good cards and 3 bad ones, you might just not use it because you don't want to give away your good cards. But first of all, it discards it, so it fuels Delirium, it fuels your graveyard effects. Second of all, it just tears through your deck.
Yes.
If you have 4 cards in your hand and you just use this, the next turn you use it again, you've already seen 8 or 9 new cards. I mean, that's insane. Plus the 2 from your draw steps. So
yeah, you'll find your bombs there.
While filling up your graveyard really well. So I think Forgotten Creation is great. If you don't have to use it, if you have a good play, often you're just not going to use it. But when you don't, the fact that you can cash in all your bad cards or your medium cards for new cards, especially getting extra value out of the graveyard stuff, that's just really good. So
that's super good.
I think Forgotten Creation is a great card. It's also 4 mana 3/3, so it's not like you're getting behind on board.
Yeah, with some evasion. By
doing all this nonsense. Yeah, yeah.
I like it a lot. I think that's really good. You sandbag some lands, turn them into spells later. That just seems very flexible. And the fact that it's a May ability is really the kicker for me. Because I could have seen them said it's not a May ability. You just cash it in your hand and it's like this weird clock that you put yourself on. But the fact that you can just be like, nope, I'm good, is great. I think that's really good. So what do you want to give it? I have no idea how the hell to grade this.
I'm gonna give Forgotten Creation an A minus.
Wow, it's that good, huh?
Well, in a bad deck or in a deck that doesn't have any hits, it's worse than that. But in any deck that can use the graveyard, like imagine this with Rise from the Drowned Yard, to put a zombie into play for each spell in your graveyard. Like, it's a great combo with that. It's a great combo with cards like Ongoing Investigation, like exile creatures from your graveyard. And if you've got a good card in your deck, it just digs you right to that card. It's good with ways to get creatures back from the graveyard, all those things. So
yeah, that's true.
And again, you're not paying much for it. The fact that it can just draw you 5 cards or 6 cards, I mean, you're not going up on total number of cards. So you're not literally drawing those cards, but you are turning your worst cards into just new cards, which is a very valuable ability.
Yeah,
so
and you're managing that too by either choosing not to or choosing to do it, or by keeping bad cards in your hand rather than just playing your land for the turn that you don't need to cash it in for the potential for a spell the next turn. I'm going to give it a B+. I got Forgotten Creation at B+, but you've convinced me that is very impressive. I like that card a lot. Let's go to Geralf's Masterpiece. That is 3 blue for a 7/7 flying zombie horror at Mythic Rare. So obviously we're sold on 7/7 flyer for 5, but it says it gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand. Pretty rude. Punish me for having cards in hand. But it has an activated ability. You can pay 3 and a blue and discard 3 cards. Ouch. Return Geralf's Masterpiece from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The thinking being here, right, that you run it out on turn 5 and it's probably going to be like something like on 5 mana, and it's going to be somewhere in the range of 4/4 flyer or something like that. And then as you play out the rest, it'll probably grow to be a 5/5 or a 6/6 flyer or something like that at some point during the course of the game. And if at any point it dies, you just save up until you get to 3 cards, pay the 4 mana, get it back, and it's immediately a 7/7. Then, you probably draw a card for the turn. It goes to 6/6. You play it. It's back up to 7/7, and your opponent's in a world of hurt because that just ends the game so quickly in the air. Card's sweet.
Card's quite good.
Yeah.
It's not hard for a Colorless Masterpiece to be pretty big. Because, again, imagine if you have 3 cards in your hand, this is still a great card.
Yeah, totally good.
And if you can get to less, it's a 6/6 or a 7/7.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Gives you some sense of inevitability with that activated ability. I mean, discarding 3 cards is no joke. It's not you won't always have 3 cards. You kind of have to save them up. But I like the fact that, them killing it once does not mean that their troubles are over from this card.
If you end up having this die, you just have to wait a turn or two, because usually you're going to try to hover at like 1 to 2 cards in hand when you're playing this, because you want it to be large. But you're going to want to wait a turn or two, and then you just get it back. And you can also discard this early. You can mill it. You can do a lot of different things. So Colorless Masterpiece seems very good to me.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I'm going to give it a B+.
I like B+ on the Masterpiece just because it is a little expensive and a little unwieldy. Though the right deck, again, we're going to say this a lot because a lot of the cards in Shadows over Innistrad are synergy based and have extra value once you're using those synergies well. So Colorless Masterpiece in a zombie deck, in a discard deck, in a deck that can self mill, its value does go up. Even though the base value here is still pretty good. So I like starting at B+ for Colorless Masterpiece with room to grow.
All right, Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. Jace is back and costs the same as Colorless Masterpiece, 3 blue, also a mythic rare. So Planeswalker Jace, 5 loyalty upon entering the battlefield, +1 ability, scry 1, then draw a card. So that's nice. It's basically, an enhanced +1 draw card. So that's really good. And that also leaves Jace at 6 loyalty right off the bat, which is that's a healthy amount of loyalty. You can also -2 to return target creature to its owner's hand. Love that. That still leaves Jace at a healthy 3 loyalty and then gets rid of whatever the best attacker would have been. And then Jace's ultimate is -8, and that's you get an emblem with whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, counter that spell, which is just nasty too. Yeah, Jace Unraveler of Secrets just seems awesome to me. Card draw, keep your opponent off balance or unable to attack Jace, and then even has a relevant ultimate that comes up in a reasonable, like this is an ultimate I could see happening occasionally, as when you pass the turn back after having played Jace, you're already at 6 loyalty and you only need to get up to 8 before Jace is threatening to go ultimate. So I'm a big fan of Jace Unraveler of Secrets. Planeswalkers Unlimited tend to be dominant, awesome cards, and I think that Jace is going to be really, really good.
Jace is quite good. I had the pleasure of playing with Jace so far.
Oh, must be.
Yeah, Jace is good. The fact that you can double bounce is really good because
minus and still have Jace around.
Right. If you can play Jace on a board where they either have one creature or they have a second, but you have a blocker, and then go bounce a creature, then they tap out for a creature again, then you bounce again and play another creature. You're in really good shape. And Scry 1 draw card's a powerful ability to go through the game. Jace also starts at a lot of loyalty. 5 loyalty is a high starting loyalty. So I think Jace gets an A. I mean, there's going to be certainly going to be games where they have 2 creatures out and you just can't play Jace. And it's Jace does have slight problems with spirit tokens. But there's also going to be games where Jace just absolutely demoralizes your opponent because they just have all 4+ mana creatures, and they either don't have smaller creatures or you can block them.
Yep, and you're just drawing extra cards and just taking over the game slowly. Yeah, I like A for Jace Unraveler of Secrets as well. That leads us to Nephalia Moondrakes, another 7-drop. This one's 5 blue for a 5/5 Drake with flying. And it says when it enters a battlefield, target creature gains flying until end of turn. Okay, sure. And then you can pay 4 blue and exile it from your graveyard. Creatures you control gain flying until end of turn. So there's all this rules text that's kind of not the biggest impact necessarily, but could be in the right situation. But what we've effectively have here is a 7-mana 5/5 flying with some upside to it.
That is basically what this is.
Yeah,
not even high upside.
No, it's just okay.
It's kind of funny too because clearly this is a blue card. It makes sense that in blue. Blue is also the color that cares about getting flying the least. So
right, yeah, good point.
having the 6-mana ability, like, it's like, yeah, you can discard this to an effect and then flash it back, to give all your creatures flying, but it's like, how many creatures do you have that don't have flying anyway, and you need a good board presence? So
right. Also, this a big 7-mana card like this tends to be more in the finisher category for a slower, more controlling deck. Yet this has this kind of temporary tempo thing going on where, if you've played a lot of these decks, like both you and I have, Luis, you know that by the time you get a chance to play your 7-mana creature like this, you're looking to keep the board stable and start dominating with it, but you're rarely looking to peck in for some incidental damage with a creature that wouldn't have been able to attack before. Like that's not a big payoff. It's a thing that'll come up and you'll be like, sure, why not? Occasionally. But that's not what you want when you're trying to stabilize a board. It's just a very offensive, ability giving a creature flying. Then paying the 6 mana and exiling it from the graveyard is like perfectly welcome upside for if your Nephalia Moondrakes happens to die. But I'm kind of shrugging at that. Like sometimes that'll just win you the game out of nowhere. But a lot of time, like Nephalia Moondrakes are just going to win you the game by being on the battlefield anyway. And I for whatever reason, I don't put a ton of stock into that, exiling it from your graveyard ability.
Neither do I. This it's got two conflicting things going on here. One is it's a 7-mana 5/5 flyer, which is a traditional finisher for control type decks.
Right.
The other is that it's giving creatures flying, which is kind of what you want as a finisher for aggro decks.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I think the card's okay, but I'm not super high on it.
I am definitely not over the moon for this.
No.
It is. In fact, I'm kind of over the Moondrakes just because it just doesn't seem like it fits great.
No.
Where I'm going to want this is just when I need a dragon.
You just need something big at the top end. It is still a 5/5 flyer.
I still think I'm just going to give Nephalia Moondrakes a C+.
I think so too. Like it's a card that you'll take occasionally if you need something big. Rattle Chains. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 spirit with flash and flying. I like that. And when it enters the battlefield, target spirit gains hexproof until end of turn. It is, of course, itself a spirit, so that's pretty good. You can, target something that got targeted with removal or whatever. And then you can cast spirit spells as though they had flash.
Rattle Chain's a great card.
Lot to like here.
Just a lot of little bits of value. None of these are devastatingly good.
No.
It's the best case scenario for Rattle Chains is that you play it to counter a removal spell in one of your other spirits.
Yes.
Even if that doesn't come up, it's still 2 mana for 2/1 flying flash. I'd always play that card.
Yep.
And it gives other spirits flash, so if you just pass with a bunch of mana up, this is the Confirmed Suspicions deck, by the way.
Oh, totally.
You get to sit there and your opponent they don't have great choices. They have to worry about you playing these things. So it's a fine card. I think Rattle Chains is kind of the definition of a B.
It's just a solid B, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's take a look at Startled Awake. This is kind of a weird one. It's 2 blue for a sorcery. It's a mythic rare. It says target opponent puts the top 13 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So that's what it does. But it also has an activated ability. And I know you might be thinking, well, how the hell does a sorcery have an activated ability? Well, here it is. 3 blue. Put Startle Awake from your graveyard onto the battlefield transformed. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Okay, so what does it become? Well, it becomes a card called Persistent Nightmare that's actually a creature. So this sorcery just transformed into a creature on the battlefield. It's a 1/1 with Skulk. So not quite unblockable, but it's going to be able to get in through a lot of types of board states. And it says, when Persistent Nightmare deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand. What a sweet card.
Yeah, I guess you could call it that.
I just think that is so cool, right? Like
it's a cool card. Yes,
it wakes you up over and over with this, horrific nightmare. The downside here, though, is very strong, right? When you pay your 4 mana for Startled Awake and you cast it on your opponent, you're pretty much doing them a pretty big favor, right? You're putting the top 13 cards of their library into their graveyard. So now, Delirium is assuredly enabled from it. They might get some incidental graveyard value, and you realistically haven't put yourself that close to actually milling them out just by one activation from Startled Awake. So that part, really bad. You would never play that card. So the question becomes, can you set up a board state where you can play a Startled Awake for 4 mana, pay the 5 mana to get it back on the battlefield. So now you're 9 mana deep, hit with it, which is tough because, any one toughness, any one powered creatures can block and trade for it, or block and eat it, depending on what they got going on. Or it can just be killed by probably any removal spell in the format. Then recast it again for 4 mana, and then redo it again for 5. It costs 9 mana per sequence here. It is a win condition on its own. It does give you some form of inevitability on some board states. But my God, the cost to get into this whole thing is really high. I don't like paying 4 mana and not affecting the board at all. And I certainly don't like paying 9 mana before I can get this little 1/1 on the battlefield. So even though I think this card's really cool and it's going to have a lot of flavor as it plays out, I think the card's actually pretty bad.
It's hard for me to evaluate this card because it really depends on context. In the average deck, yes, it's bad.
Yep.
Because the plan of spending 4, like you said, giving your opponent an advantage, then spending 5, and then the last 4 is fine because that kills them. But spending 4, then 5, and then hoping your opponent can't disrupt you is a lot of wheels to be spinning. But first of all, in a control deck, especially in sealed, for example, this could one-shot your opponent. If you
absolutely could.
If you have the blue vessel, which mills them for 3, or if you're playing against a deck that's kind of aggressively self-milling. I have almost decked myself in this format without doing anything particularly special. Just you play decks that have, draws and discards, and look at your top 2, put one in the graveyard and one in your hand. You play some cards, cards that mill yourself. And against those decks, you don't have to do that much. One Startled Awake might do it.
Now, my assumption here, by the way, is that if you get to cast Startled Awake twice,
yes,
you should win that game, right?
I think you always win because your opponent starts with, assuming they didn't mulligan, 33 cards in their deck, so 26 cards means it has to be turn 6. They have to kill you on turn 6, but also how are you casting it twice by turn 6?
Yeah, you're not. So by the time you cast it again, it will be past that time, and it should mill your opponent out. Yeah. Now, that is powerful. That is very potent. And
I think I would always play this in sealed.
Okay, in sealed, you're just running it. Now, what kind of a draft deck would you play this in? If you were playing a straight up control deck, would you? Because
I think so, yes.
I mean, because look, this is not the kind of win condition I want in a control deck. That said, if you hit twice, it's over, and that's really powerful. But my control decks don't want to pay 4 mana to not affect the board, right? That's how you lose, playing a control deck. That's where your control deck goes from controlling the game to not affecting the game and taking a lot of damage. But I got to say, I respect this. The fact that if you cast it again, you can get them. What if your opponent has Farbog Revenant?
Then this is not going to get through, but when you bring this back, your opponent's not going to have more than 1 or 2 creatures that can block it. If they're playing the white spirits deck, maybe more, but you might be just 1 removal spell away from getting a second hit. I would play this in a control deck. I have had a control deck where this would be the kind of card I would want.
Okay.
So I'm not going to give this just a terrible starting grade, but bear in mind that a lot of decks just don't want this card. It's also just completely dead against a beatdown deck.
That's what I mean. Yeah, if you're playing against some,
But the thing is, I think you're going to play against. There's going to be an average of 2 decks per draft that this card's just good against because they're already doing so much of the work for you.
Right. Which brings me to my theory: is this a sideboard card?
It's both a decent win condition if you're looking for one and a sideboard card. So
okay,
I think it's a great sideboard card. It's actually
really, I feel really I want to bring it in out of the board. I want to bring it in when it's awesome and not have it in when my opponent's playing, Madness 4/1s or whatever. It's a really good sideboard card. Again, if I'm just a really controlling deck that has a lot of card advantage, a lot of removal, and I want a win condition, this seems like a good win condition. Okay. Yeah, no, I could see that. And again, I really have to respect the fact that second activate, it's a card that warps the game. Because you hit them once with it, it doesn't do anything. Or, you started to wake them once and they're like, okay, whatever. But then they have to worry about this thing coming back and they have to worry about the little 1/1, and if they can't deal with it, it's well, I couldn't do anything and I just lost to it. If they can, then they're probably going to win that game. So interesting card. Really cool design too.
It's funny because it's going to be the kind of card that's either an F or an A.
Yep.
Even from game to game in the same deck. Because sometimes
Right.
it's going to be your best card because your opponent's like, you cast it and your opponent's like, well, now I have 4 or 5 turns to win the game because I just don't have that many cards in my deck, or I can't stop you from bringing this back and getting in.
Yeah.
Or you have it in your hand and your opponent just doesn't even have anything close to caring about this because they just played werewolf, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I can spend 4 minutes to do nothing and then die.
Right. See, to me, this just makes me want to put it in my sideboard. I mean, I'm not saying it's exclusively, but like if that's where I'm going to start off with it, I think. And then, after I lose to it 2 or 3 times, I'll probably start main decking it. So I'm going to give it a sideboard grade, actually. I'm going to give it a sideboard B.
I'm going to give Startled Awake. I want to, I don't think it's a strict sideboard card. I think that some control decks will want it. I think it's more in the like C range, but again, that's a deceptive grade because
you're kind of averaging the A and the F.
Yeah, so yeah. I'm going to say Startled Awake is a C. If your control deck's really lacking in win conditions, then you could take this higher. It's also a good sideboard card for any blue deck. So
would you play 2?
Yes, 2. I think they get better in multiples.
Probably.
If you just draw 2,
bang you're dead.
If you just draw 2, you almost just win.
Yeah. So. Okay, let's move on from Startled Awake. That was a really complex card to I've never seen a card like that. I mean, it's a friggin' sorcery that turns into a creature. It's weird. This next one's cool. Thing in the Ice. It's 1 and a blue for an 0/4 with Defender. It's a horror. It says, Thing in the Ice enters the battlefield with 4 ice counters on it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, remove an ice counter from Thing in the Ice. When it has no ice counters on it, transform it. And when you do, it becomes Awoken Horror, which is a 7/8 Kraken Horror. And it says, when this creature transforms into Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. So the big question here, right? I think that, this card got previewed pretty early, and there's been a lot of discussion for it around Constructed and stuff like that. But the big question I have is, how often are we actually flipping this thing? Because my contention is that it's going to be very difficult to get it transformed and limited.
It'll be fairly difficult, but as an 0/4 blocker, it buys you some amount of time by itself.
True.
And that's not a terrible blocker. And the payoff when you do flip it is really, really big.
It's massive when you do.
It smashes for 7 while bouncing all your opponent's creatures. I mean, there are some horrors every now. Some random cards are just horrors, but it's still going to be incredibly good.
Yeah, but I honestly think that this card's not that good and limited. I don't
think it's great.
Yeah.
This is why this card this set is difficult to evaluate on a grades perspective, which makes me not like the grades more than I normally do. I normally, if I thought everyone would just listen to what we're saying and then use the grades as like a signpost as opposed to just like the whole thing.
That is my assumption.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the truth. I know some people just look at the grades, but like I'm operating on the assumption that they listen to us and know that
we've both been doing set reviews for a long time. That's how that works. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, agreed.
More power to you if you're listening to all the things we're saying. But the grades are just deceptive here because Thing in the Ice. I agree with you. It's not going to be easy to flip. There's going to be a lot of decks where this is D+ level, C- level. There's going to be some decks where this is just going to be great, or if you have this in your opening hand or in your first 10 cards, it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it does win the game many times with the playing Transform. So the question I think you want to ask yourself, and the things that you should be considering when you think about Thing in the Ice, is how, on average, in this format, how many instants and sorceries does your average deck have? Now, I can tell you that for a normal format, that usually is in the like 3 to 5 range, something like that, for an average deck. Remember, if you're playing 15 creatures in your deck and you're playing 23 spells total, that only leaves 8 slots, right? So if you've got 3 to 5 of those as instant or sorcery, and 2 to 3 and 1 to 3, artifact, enchantment, whatever, right? Because remember, enchantments don't trigger this. Your what is it called? Paralyzing, whatever. That doesn't trigger this thing. These are the cards that you're going to be playing draft in and draft out, and they don't trigger it. If you've only got 4, you're never flipping Thing in the Ice. Right? I mean, you need to...
Well, no, technically 4 could.
You have to basically draw your whole deck on average to flip Thing in the Ice. So, if you're playing 6, you're probably not flipping your Thing in the Ice very often.
No, and that's the thing.
So this is starting to look tough, right? Like where it's like, do I need to play 8? Does every non-creature spell, do I need to play 12 creatures and 9 or 10,
Think of that as a departure from a normal card. I mean, you're talking like, yeah, the average limited deck has 14 creatures in it. Well, sure, but that has nothing to do with the decks that are going to use Thing in the Ice.
Okay.
They're going to have 9 creatures or 8 creatures in it, and just tons of
not
spells.
9 or 8.
Yeah, you could definitely build control decks with that many creatures.
Yeah, I don't like those though. I've built them before, and this is obviously a tangent, but I don't buy that. I really don't. I think that even your control deck should have 10 to 12 at least.
It just depends on the format.
That's true. That is true.
There are formats where you can just do that.
Well, I will tell you that my very small experience with this format says that thanks to vampires and thanks to werewolves, you do not get to just build a deck that has almost no creatures. Like you will get punished by those decks.
Right. And I'm not saying that you need to be able to do that. And that this is a format where you're going to be able to do that. But I've done a lot of limited formats where you have 6 creatures in your deck. Your deck is fantastic. So
okay, fair enough.
If that's the case, then Thing in the Ice is going to be one of the perfect cards for that deck. It's just not going to happen all that often. So
yeah,
I think our baseline for Thing in the Ice is giving it like a D.
Yeah.
But if you can get 13 spells into your deck, then all of a sudden Thing in the Ice becomes a lot more attractive, especially if
it becomes like an A.
Yes, especially if those spells are card draw spells. If you're stringing card draw spells together and just triggering Thing in the Ice reliably, it's a fantastic card. So
you mentioned the I forgot the name, but the one in a blue. Look at the top 2. One goes in your yard, one goes in your hand, or whatever.
Right.
Like those type of cards go up a lot when you've got a Thing in the Ice in your deck, right?
Nagging thoughts. It's the sort of thing where I can't recommend first picking this card. We were not going to say like this is a card you should take early and build around. It's certainly a build around. I think it's a build around B.
There you go. I think that's probably where we land on this.
And
it is a build around, 100%. Like I just would not plan on having this card transform very often unless you work towards that goal. And when it does, man, it's a game winner. I mean, that is ridiculous. All right, so let's go build around B on Thing in the Ice. Man, they're really throwing us some tough ones here. Welcome to the Fold is next. It's 2 blue for a sorcery, and it's got Madness of blue X. So let's see what it does. Gain control of target creature if its toughness is 2 or less. If Welcome to the Fold's Madness cost was paid, instead gain control of that creature if its toughness is X or less. Oof. So for 4 mana, you can get control of a smallish creature, right? 2 toughness or less. Just straight up mind control, except for it's a sorcery, which is even better. But the Madness gets really interesting because now we're talking about 2 things. One, getting bigger creatures if you've got more mana. But even more importantly, you can do it at instant speed, right?
You can't. More importantly, you can take a bigger creature, but yes, you can also do it at instant speed.
Okay, so you think the first part's more important. I mean, maybe I'm greedy, but, I keep thinking of stealing creatures. I guess stealing them in combat doesn't really do the same thing I want it to do, does it? Because it doesn't untap it.
No, but that's fine.
No, I'm not complaining. I'm just, sort of reframing it. Yeah, you're right. So stealing bigger things is the most important thing. But either way, getting Madness on Welcome to the Fold seems pretty amazing.
It is, but 2 blues, gain control of target creature if its toughness is 2 or less is a B. You would always play that card.
Yes.
And it's especially good in this format because of werewolves, because werewolves mean that there's a lot of slightly smaller creatures that grow into bigger creatures. Oh. So taking a 2/2 werewolf that then flips into a 4/4, you all of a sudden got a ton of value there. You don't have to give it back if that happens.
How about stealing it with the werewolf transform trigger on the stack?
Also a good play.
Boom.
Though it's probably going to flip back if you used a spell to Madness this out. So, good luck with that.
Good point.
But Welcome to the Fold's a great card.
Yeah, seems really solid.
You could put in your deck without having the Madness. I think it's a kind of solid B if you have none or few ways to Madness it, and it moves up to an A if you've got a lot of ways to reliably Madness it for cheap. We're not talking catalogs here. We're talking Reckless Scholars more than that.
Right, because that's a lot of mana you're going to end up paying.
Right.
All right, yeah, Welcome to the Fold. I would settle on a B+, I think, on your...
Yeah, I would start at B+ for Welcome to the Fold. Yeah. Welcome to the Fold.
Well, man, Blue gave us some real food for thought there for sure. Some really cool and weird cards. I'm actually just really excited to try out a bunch of those and also just to try to make a few of them work. Let's move on to black. Asylum Visitor is 1 and a black for a 3/1 vampire wizard. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card and lose a life, and that's not a May ability. So that's pretty sweet. And then it's also got Madness for 1 and a black kind of thrown in there as well. So we've got a 3/1 for 2 mana that also has a relevant, potentially relevant later game ability. And it's got Madness just on top of all that. Pretty solid little card here.
Yeah, Asylum Visitor's a great card.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot to say about it really, but...
No, it's a 2-drop that's good on turn 2 and also good later because presumably paying life for cards is a good deal. Some games it's going to be a liability, but that's very rare.
Yep.
Most of the games you're just going to be happy that you get this additional value. And like you said, it has Madness, so sometimes you'll Madness it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to give Asylum Visitor a B.
I give it a B also. The card just seems solid. Next is Behold the Beyond. It's 5 black for a sorcery. It's mythic, and it says discard your hand. Well, that's a pretty bad start for you and I, Behold the Beyond. Let's see what you got for me. Search your library for 3 cards and put those cards into your hand, then shuffle your library. That's cool, but come on, I'm not playing this in limited, am I?
I have cast this card. I cast it in my second game ever of this format.
You would. Is it good? I mean... Look,
no.
the power level's there, right? Like, we know the power level's there, but like 7 mana?
So it's a 7-drop that doesn't affect the board. It also is a liability if you've got something like 4 or 5 cards in your hand. Casting this is just not great.
No.
The upside is that on your next turn, you get to play 2 good spells. If not more. You have 7, maybe 8 mana if you draw a land. And you get the 3 best cards left in your deck. So it's a cute card. It can certainly win games if nothing's happening. It's a very like in a stalemate, this card's great.
I mean, because it doesn't care how big your hand is, right? Like you can have 0 cards, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't. Like if you're like top decking and you've got Behold the Beyond in your hand, you top deck the 7th mana, you play it, tap out. You still get to do this, right? So it's not like. It's just just tutor up your 3 best cards for no cost. So that, I guess could happen sometimes. Whatever. You kind of had me at it costs 7 mana and doesn't do anything, right? Like that is a really tough sell.
Yeah, I like this card and I will enjoy playing with it and trying to figure out ways to use it, but I can't in good conscience recommend that you put this card in your deck if you want to win games of limited.
Yeah.
So it might be a great card in sealed.
That is a great, that's what I was going to ask
you. If the sealed format is slow enough, this is the kind of card that does break parity very, very well. So
totally.
Got to start Behold the Beyond at a D. I don't think it's a straight up F because it has some potential, but I'm going to start Behold the Beyond at a D.
I agree. Yeah. Kind of a cool card too. I could see why you were attracted to that card. Diregraph Colossus is much cheaper. It's 2 and a black for a 2/2 zombie giant, and it enters a battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each zombie card in your graveyard. So it could be quite big. And then whenever you cast a zombie spell, you get a 2/2 black zombie creature onto the battlefield tapped.
Sure do.
So it's basically just the most zombie-centric card we've seen in a really long time. It's a 2/2 zombie giant, which I find kind of funny. But, I would assume that a good percentage of the time it's going to be bigger than a 2/2 when it enters the battlefield. And if you're really working hard to get that graveyard stocked up, it could be significantly bigger than that. And the static ability is really good too. I mean, even if you just cast 1 zombie after playing your Diregraph Colossus, you're just getting a free 2/2. And sure, it's tapped, but whatever. I mean, it's just spewing value. So, I can't really find anything bad to say about Diregraph Colossus other than it is a 2/2 for 3 on the surface. So like if you're going to run it out there on turn 3 without any zombies in hand, maybe it's not great, but that's such a nitpick. I just think this card doesn't ask too much as long as you're building it in a deck that is probably blue-black with zombies. It's going to be an all-star for you. I think the card's really solid.
It definitely is. And unlike Thalia's Lieutenant, you actually want to play this before you play all your other zombies.
Yeah.
I would rather get a 2/2 than a ++1 counter. So
totally.
Thalia's Lieutenant, you want that to be the last human you play. You want this to be the first human you play.
Yeah. I mean,
it's zombie rather.
Zombie, yeah. So I think it's good though. I don't know how high to grade it. Is it a B+? Is it a B?
I would start by saying it's a B+. It's not like when you draft, it's not like you're going to naturally end up with like 7 or 8 zombies in your deck unless you're trying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not free. It feels like there are slightly fewer zombies than humans. I'd have to take a look at the actual count, but there are a ton of humans, and they're not quite as many zombies, especially since it doesn't work when you cast like a spell that makes zombies. That's not actually a zombie spell. Like
right, it's not tribal.
Gisa summons or whatever to like make 2 or bidding. You make 2/2/2 zombies. That doesn't actually trigger Diagraph Colossus or interact with really in any way.
No.
So
yeah, so there's clearly some build around me undertones here, but I would still assume that the Diagraph Colossus is going to be in the B to B plus range.
Yeah, I'm going to give Diagraph Colossus a B plus.
Card gives you a lot of payoff. Elusive Tormentor is next. Elusive Tormentor is 2 black for a vampire wizard. It's a 4/4. So we've got a 4/4 for 4. Thumbs up there. And it says you can pay a generic mana and discard a card to transform it. So if you do so, which is, I got to say that's quite good. It becomes Insidious Mist.
It does.
So Insidious Mist is an 0/1 elemental that's hexproof and indestructible, and it can't block and it can't be blocked. And when it attacks and isn't blocked, you can pay 2 and a black, and if you do, poof, you transform it again. So
Tormentor does a couple different things for you. One, it's a 4-mana 4/4. That's already a good deal.
I like where you're starting.
You would put 2 black 4/4 into your deck. 2, it's a cheap madness outlet. You only have to pay 1 to get madness value. Mm-hmm. The other is it dodges removal very well. By turning it into Insidious Mist and it being indestructible, if it's targeted by a spell, when that spell resolves, it probably won't kill it because of that, and then it becomes hexproof as it sits on the mist. And then lastly, you can also just start throwing away cards to deal damage. Like, you have this in play, they have a bunch of blockers. You pay 1, discard a card, turn it into the mist, attack with the mist, it can't be blocked, pay 3 mana, flip it back into Tormentor. You traded 4 mana and a card to hit your opponent for 4.
That's insane.
It's a good late game ability. Yeah.
This card, this is probably the most annoying card ever.
It is very annoying to play against.
You can't kill it. It can hit you when it wants. They do have to discard cards, for this, so it's not like free. But I don't know. I just see like upside on upside on upside, and I can't wait to torment my opponent with this thing. I think this card's great. Yeah,
Elusive Tormentor is a great card. It's not a bomb when you're like looking for like, I need to top deck a dragon type bomb, a 5/5 flyer that can just shut everything down. But it does so much. The fact that it's good on turn 4, it can give you unblockable damage late and still give you madness outlets.
It works with blocking too, right?
Yeah, you can block it with it and flip it into an indestructible, even though it won't deal damage back then, of course.
Right, but it won't die.
It will not. So I think Elusive Tormentor, I think it's an A.
Yeah, I do too. I was going to say A-, but I just like all the different, you throw on the madness enabling and stuff. I'd give Elusive Tormentor an A. That card just seems awesome. That's also just one of the coolest cards I've ever seen. Ever After is 4 black for a sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of those creatures is a black zombie in addition to other colors and types. And you put Ever After on the bottom of its owner's library. So how much are you willing to pay for a divination?
Well, this is a bit more than just a divination. Because
is it though?
you are up 2 cards, but importantly, you're up
you also get to cast them. Yeah.
Because presumably the 2 creatures total more than 6 mana. It's pretty hard to not have that happen, especially if you're actually interested in casting the card. So you're getting 7 or 8 mana worth of cards plus up a card total.
That's what I said, divination.
Yeah, okay, it's just divination, you're right. Ever After's good.
It's fine, right?
It's not insane because you do have to factor in that some games you will have this in your hand and just not have good targets.
Yes. Or targets.
You'll either have 0 or 1 creatures in your graveyard, or the creatures you'll have like, a 2/2 and a 3/3, and it's like, I don't really want to pay 6 mana to put those 2 into play.
Right.
So you have to temper those expectations.
That said, it is playable.
Yeah, it is definitely playable. I mean, it's actually a good finisher, especially in a discard or self-milling deck.
Yeah, agreed.
I would put Ever After at like a B minus, and then if you get no synergies with it, maybe it's a C plus. But even then, it's still a 2-for-1. I think it's a B minus.
Yeah, I had it at C plus, but I could see it being a B minus as well. One quick note too is that it's up to 2 creatures. So if there is just that one creature and you just need it back, you can get it back. They don't make you have to. From Under the Floorboards, which doesn't sound like a Magic card name, but it is. It's 3 black for a sorcery. And it's got Madness for black X. What does it do? Well, you get 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped, and you gain 3 life. And if you play the Madness cost, then instead of 3 2/2 black zombies and 3 life, you get X 2/2 black zombies and gain X life. So on its surface, it's effectively black X originally, except for the X is locked in at 3. So you're getting 3 zombies and 3 life, and then it can become variable if you Madness it. It could be less, but it could also be much, much more, depending on how the Madness actually comes about. The fact that it's instant speed is relevant, but maybe not as relevant as you would see, meaning instant speed when you Madness it. The zombies are tapped, so you don't get to ambush a bunch of creatures in combat, but you can gain life, and sometimes life gain and instant speed can be the difference if you're in a race scenario or whatever. This card just seems very good to me. I've played against it twice already, and it's been a solid performer. I wouldn't call it an over-the-top bomb, but the 3 life is a nice touch, and you're getting 6 power and 6 toughness over 3 different creatures for the 5 mana. The fact that they enter the battlefield tapped is real. That is a tangible downside that you're going to feel on some games. But I think it's still worth it to play from Under the Floorboards. And then if you get to Madness it out for 6 or something just ridiculous way late in the game, you're going to be in love with the card. I mean, that's a huge swing. So I think from Under the Floorboards is quite good. And I would give it, like, in the B range, probably just give it a B.
I like it more than that.
Is it B plus?
I like it at B plus, and then if you have enough Madness outlets, it easily moves into the A category because paying 5 mana for 3 life and 6/6 worth of stats already good.
It's good.
So you don't have to do any
paying
more.
5 mana.
Yeah, paying 5 mana.
Sorry.
And that's already just above average, and you had to do no work. You just had to cast the card. So if you've got 0 mana Madness enablers, where you can just discard this to like something like a Ravenous Bloodseeker or what have you, and just spend 6 or 7 mana to get a bunch of zombies and a bunch of life. That's very, very good. So I'm going to give From Under the Floorboards a B plus.
All right. Markov Dread Knight, is 3 black for a 3/3 flying vampire knight. And it's got the activated ability, 2 and a black, discard a card, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Markov Dread Knight. So pretty fair rare here, right?
Yeah, when I first read this, I was actually surprised it was rare. Mm-hmm. It looks kind of like an uncommon.
Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it?
But it is very powerful.
It's a powerful card.
It takes a lot of resources, but imagine you play this on turn 5, then on turn 6 you play your 6th land, discard 2 cards, and then you have a 7/7 flyer and your opponent's dead in 2 turns. Granted, if they have a bounce spell or a removal spell, you're down 3 cards and a bunch of mana. Mm-hmm. So there are drawbacks, but this is still a really big flying finisher.
Yeah, well, and you can also take the middle ground of activating it once, making it
you have
5/5 Come on, and hitting them for 5, and that's a nice clock. Not as great as a Madness enabler, though, right?
No, I wouldn't really look at this as a Madness enabler. Yeah, like sometimes it'll happen, but overall, Dread Knight's good. This is kind of like B level good. Like,
yeah, it seems like a B to me.
It'll steal some games. Some games you're just going to be like, well, screw it. I'm just going to go all in. I'm going to double activate this on turn 6, and if my opponent doesn't have an answer, they're dead very quickly.
Yep. Your opponent's going to look at their hand and either smile or sigh.
But in general, and the card, the power level evened out over all of those activations is still, you end up fine. Also, is this thing just gigantic? Are those humans in the foreground? I can't really tell.
I think they're gargoyles.
Oh, okay. That's less cool. I thought this was some sort of 15-foot tall vampire.
It does get huge, though.
Anyways, Markov Dread Knight, we've settled on a B.
A B, yeah.
This next one's very interesting.
Okay.
Mind Rack Demon. 2 black for a mythic. It's a demon. It's a 4/5 flying trample. So 4 mana, 4/5 flying trample.
Woof.
When it enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. All right, that's an upside in this set. and it has Delirium. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 4 life unless you have Delirium. So,
wow.
Basically, it comes with a negative, but if you have Delirium, that negative disappears.
And you're getting an incredible deal, right?
Yeah, 4 mana, 4/5 flyer is great.
Wow, that's insane.
So there's 2 ways to use this card. One is play a really aggressive deck, where you're just in for the fact that both of you are losing 4 life a turn and just hope your opponent doesn't play like Bound by Moonsilver on it.
Yes, I like that.
the other is to play just like a Delirium deck where you're pretty reliably getting Delirium, and you can play this as a 4 mana 4/5, which actually enables your other Delirium cards by milling you, and then you figure you can stop from killing you pretty easily.
Yeah, and you're going to get most of the way to Delirium just by milling yourself.
It's really hard to not get 2 card types, and
right.
Hitting lands is especially important because those don't naturally go to the graveyard. You do need to do a little bit of work to get them there. So this card seems very good to me.
It does to me too.
It's not that hard to get to work. Don't put this in your deck if you don't have a good way of getting to Delirium, because otherwise you're just going to cast it and you're just going to lose.
Right. Yeah, but you will die to your own Mind Rack Demon if you try to do that. I don't know. Yeah, I'm in. I think this card, I think that the efficiency overpowers the downside here by a decent chunk, though the downside's real. There will be games where you're going to look at it and be like, I don't know if I can cast this thing, right? If you're down low on life and if you don't hit Delirium off of it, then, you could put yourself in a scenario where you just gave your opponent a win condition. That could be bad. So it's a real downside, but I think it overcomes it. I like it. I'd give it a B+.
I like B+ for Mind Rack Demon. In an aggressive deck, especially one that does happen to enable Delirium, like you've got some dead weights, that sort of thing, then Mind Rack is just a solid A. But if you put this in like an average mid-range deck that's not striving super hard for Delirium, sometimes you just would rather cast a 4 mana 3/3 on turn 4 and wait on Mind Rack for a turn or 2 until you have a higher chance of hitting Delirium. So just you're going to lose this card. You put this card in your deck, 2 things will happen. 1, you will have situations where you cast it, and if you don't spike Delirium off the mill 4, you're going to lose.
Yes.
2, your opponent's going to put like Sleep Paralysis on this, and then you're going to be very sad.
You're going to be very, very sad. Now, if you do hit Delirium, it's palatable.
Yeah, but as long as you know you're signing up for these things, then that's fine.
Yeah, I'm signing up for them. Next card is Relentless Dead. It's black for a 2/2 zombie with Menace. It's a mythic rare. When it dies, you can pay black. If you do, return it to its owner's hand. So that's pretty cool. Just it dies. If you just have a black mana up, you can just get it back right away. Also, when it dies, you can pay X. If you do, return another target zombie creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Realistic, that's a great card.
Is it great in limited? I actually have a hard time figuring it. It seems quite strong, mainly for the first ability. The second ability, Menace is good, but it dies, you get it back. That is just incredibly annoying for your opponent, right?
Relentless Dead is legit great. It's a 2 mana 2/2 Menace. Black 2/2 Menace, especially with a relevant creature type, you would put that in your deck every time if you were as long as you can afford to play 9 swamps or so. Having the additional ability of paying a black to get it back makes it very annoying. And remember, this can block. Cards like Bloodghast tend to not be able to block, Gravecrawler, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Relentless Dead is not bound by such a restriction. Probably because it couldn't fit it on the
probably not
the text box. So you can actually just make the world's most annoying blocker with this. You just have a 2/2 blocker that every time it dies, you pay a black and get it back. Also, if you've got extra mana floating around and you can return another zombie, that's just great value. It's not hard to put all those things together. So Relentless Dead's a fantastic card.
Okay.
It's a cheap little efficient rare. It just reminds me a little bit of the Militia Captain, where you're getting a 2 mana 2/2, especially when this even has Menace, that has very good late game relevance. So I would give Relentless Dead an A, which is a rarity for such a small creature, but I think it just has a big effect on the game.
Okay, I'm going to give Relentless Dead a B+. I'm not quite at the A level for it because, like you said, you mentioned that it does have an effect late in the game that can be great if you've got other zombies. But if you don't, it's a good effect, but not a great effect, right? Blocking routinely. So I'm going to go B+ on Relentless Dead, but you've convinced me that is a lot going on. And I would assume that most black decks are going to have the ability to get back something else, right, when it dies. And that really makes life for your opponent pretty annoying. To the Slaughter is next. It's 2 and a... Oh, no. What is that, a sheep? My God, that's brutal. That's not much of a
I think that's a baby elk.
Is it? Probably, knowing Elmer. 2 and a black for an instant. Target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, and it's got Delirium. Instead, that player sacrifices a creature and a planeswalker. Sadly, usually when you see a rare black removal spell, that usually creeps into the A range for limited because it ends up being some type of unconditional, a card that they don't print at common or uncommon anymore. But unfortunately, To the Slaughter doesn't meet that criteria at all, as it's what we call an edict effect, right? And those tend to be pretty mediocre and limited.
They are. When your opponent has 3 or 4 creatures on the board, the card you're getting is just not very good.
No.
And
the Planeswalker thing.
The Planeswalker part is just about as irrelevant as you can get. It's not very relevant that your opponent, or frequent that your opponent's going to have a Planeswalker in play. They're mythics. There's just not a ton of them.
So are we sending this card to the Slaughter, or?
Yeah, it's
just medium, right? I mean, it's not that edicts are unplayable. It's 2 and a black instant. Your opponent sacks creature. Delirium. Your opponent sacks creature.
it doesn't really get that much better. I mean, yes, if your opponent has a Planeswalker, you get a little additional value. I think To the Slaughter is like a C-. If you have to play it, if you have it stacks well with other removal, right? If you've got 2 Deadweights and To the Slaughter in your opening hand, you're going to get a good card with To the Slaughter. Because you're going to deadweight their small creatures into the Slaughter, their first medium one. But overall, it's still just not that reliable of a removal spell and gets really wrecked by tokens. So I'll just give To the Slaughter a D.
I think it's a D. It's a mediocre removal spell. Maybe you'll play occasionally, but often you won't. And that leaves us with our last black rare, Triskaidekaphobia. What a cool card. It's 3 and a black for an enchantment. And it's weird. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose one. Each player with exactly 13 life loses the game. Then each player gains a life. Or each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, and then each player loses 1 life. I've been getting some early reports, Luis, that this card actually does things. Like, that people like this card. My initial response was that it would be too tricky to try to set up for limited. But do you actually see that this could be a card that you'd want to play and that could actually get the job done?
I died to this card today. And
wow.
I saw it win 2 more games. This card is just good.
It's good, right? Like
it's basically got 2 things going on. One is that you can play it and just using it to make each player gain life or each player lose life. Like in a control deck, each player gaining life isn't terrible, and each player losing life is a way to, in an aggro deck, as a way to pressure your opponent. Mm-hmm. But secretly what happens is you just attack your opponent under 13, you play this, and then they have 1 turn to adjust their life total or die.
And that's very difficult to do.
Oh, yeah. When you don't know this card is coming, what happened was I was at 15 and got attacked by a 2/2, and a 1/1 flyer stayed back, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I was playing against Matt Nass, and he just goes Triskaidekaphobia, and I'm just like, I go, all right. I look at my hand, and I'm just drawing my card, and I'm like, all right, I'm dead.
Wow, insane. And then is there a scenario, like what does a scenario look like where, let's say you attack your opponent down to 15 like this, but you can't get them any lower, and then you play Triskaidekaphobia and then pass the turn back. So now they're effectively on a 2-turn clock, right?
Yep.
Like you're just going to be like, we all lose a life, and they have to either kill you before that happens or find a way to gain or lose life on their own.
Or get you to 13, because this doesn't target. This says each player.
Or get you to 13.
Right. So the other
that's awkward.
way to get around it is to reduce your whoever's controlling.
What a crazy little mini game that starts, isn't it?
And that would be a draw if both players start the turn, at your upkeep at 13.
That's annoying.
So
we've established that there's some things going on here, and that this card actually has some relevant power. Even though, I'll admit at first blush, it doesn't look like it does. It looks like one of those like goofy cards that you wouldn't really play, but apparently it does. The question is, how good is it? We still have to deal with the fact that when you play this, nothing happens, right? 4 mana, do nothing. Enchantment is pretty tough. It doesn't trigger until the beginning of your upkeep. So, I mean, you could be taking a serious beating in between. It's kind of a tricky card where if you play with both players at 20 life, I don't think it's really doing a whole ton for you. So I don't know. I have a really difficult time trying to pin a grade or even trying to really wrap my head around how good or bad this card is, I would first pick it at this point because I have to play with it to figure it out. Do you have a sense for, on average how good this thing is?
I would say it's probably closer to an A than a B, so like B plus A minus, so somewhere in that range.
Okay.
I'll give the card. I think I'll give it an A minus.
Okay, I'm just going to give it a B. I'm copying out, I'll admit. But
if you have this in your opening hand, your opponent's at 7 life. You just have to deal 7 damage to them, and then you just play this and you win.
You have to deal exactly. Yeah, that is crazy when you put it.
It's not hard to deal exactly. Your creatures are mostly going to be 2/2s.
No, totally. And even if you miss by 1, it's just an extra turn.
Right. This makes up the difference. So I think the card's good. Card's quite good.
Okay. I love it. Also, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on with the artwork if people haven't looked at that. All right, that does it for black. Some interesting stuff from there, too. I don't know. Nothing really stood out to me in particular. I think these rares seem, on average, worse than the colors that we've seen so far. But, yeah, there's some stuff. So let's keep it rolling here. We're in red now. Avacyn's Judgment is 1 and a red. For a sorcery, it says it does 2 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. But it's also got Madness for red X. And if Avacyn's Judgment Madness cost was paid, it deals X damage divided as you choose among those creature or players instead. Yep. That's a real Magic card right there.
Yeah, it's great. You would play this card every time, even without the Madness. Totally. 1 in a red, deal 2 divided as you choose.
A heartbeat.
That's Forked Bolt, and that card is well worth 2 mana. And then if you've got Madness outlets, this turns into Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder is one of the best cards there's been in Limited. So
yeah, instant speed, cheaper Rolling Thunder. I will definitely sign up for that. I would say that Avacyn's Judgment is just an A, right? It's just like a straight up A.
If it's pack 3 and you have 0 Madness outlets, you'll take this card still because it's still great. And then you end up with no Madness outlets. It's going to be more on the like C plus level, B minus level.
Yeah,
but
that's your floor.
pick up some Madness outlets.
Yeah,
make your B into an A. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, Avacyn's Judgment is an A.
Yep. Next is So I Heard You Like Fireballs. Burn from Within is X red for a sorcery. It deals X damage to target creature or player. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it loses indestructible until end of turn. Okay. And if it would die this turn, exile it instead. They don't print too many of these anymore, and they're certainly not below rare, generally speaking, where it's red X deal X damage to something. But here we go. Burn from Within. These cards are generally very good. They're flexible. They end up being win conditions late in the game because you can just hit your opponent with it and just kill them, right? Oh, do 6 to you. That's it. The game's over. And there, no blocks, no nothing. You can't do anything about it. And then they're flexible enough that they can kill a creature when you need to kill a creature. There is a downside there in that they're rarely efficient at doing that. You're paying, 5 mana to kill a 4 toughness creature. That's okay. You'll take it at sorcery speed. But truthfully, when you combine those two things, you just get powerhouse cards. These cards are they deliver. They're very, very good. They either get a blocker out of the way or they kill your opponent. And it's hard to ask for much more from a card like Burn from Within.
Yeah, I'm still not like super high on Fireballs just being automatic A's. Like Avacyn's Judgment is because you get to spread the damage around and get a 2 or a 3 for 1.
I would give this an A minus.
Yeah, I have just straight up Fireballs at like B plus range.
Like Blaze is a B plus?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I mean,
it's the only time it's really awesome is when you're killing your opponent. At every other cost, it's slightly inefficient.
Yeah, but to me, the combination of those two equals A range.
Yeah, I guess I'm fine at B plus / A minus.
Yeah,
from Within.
Splitting hairs. Yeah, and then the Indestructible and Exile. The Indestructible thing will come up very rarely, but the Exile thing that matters. Don't forget that. We've talked about why earlier in the last episode in this one too. Devil's Playground is a card that I've actually had a chance to play twice already. It's 4 red for a sorcery, and you get 4 1/1 red devil creature tokens. They have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Card's solid. Very good.
Significantly better than the uncommon version, Dance the Devils. That makes 2 of them. Even though this is a sorcery, that's an instant.
Yeah.
Just getting 2 more mana to get 2 more devils is a very good deal in the same card. So,
yeah.
I think Devil's Playground's a B.
I do too.
Just a great card.
It's performed very well for me. It's never felt like, oh, game over. You can't win now.
Yeah.
But very, very good. Falconwrath Gorger. Who's hungry?
One red, so it's red mana.
Yeah.
One mana total for a 2/1 Vampire Berserker. It says each vampire creature card you own that isn't on the battlefield has madness equal to its mana cost. So all your vampires have madness. Well, probably half of them already did, though.
Yeah, I agreed. And I'm not really that excited about the Gorger. I mean, look, it's a 2/1 for 1 mana. That's okay. Like, you can play that. Those cards are typically in the C range. Like, they're fine. If you draw them late in the game, they have a similar effect to a 2-mana spell, but you get to play it a turn earlier, so it can get in for a couple of extra damage. Totally fine. The madness thing, I'm assuming, isn't going to be a game changer, but will come up occasionally, so I'm not putting a lot of stock in that. So, I'd give this Gorger something like a C or a C+.
I like C+ on Falconwrath Gorger. Yeah, if you want the aggressive 2/1, that's really why you should be playing the card.
That's the pull.
Yeah. Don't really try to make some kind of madness deck based on this card. Just put it in your aggressive deck and get the bonus when you can.
Yeah. Next is Flameblade Angel, which is 4 red for a 4/4 angel creature with flying. And yes, we're talking about a red angel here. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you or a permanent you control, you may have Flameblade Angel deal 1 damage to that source's controller. I had a chance to play with and against this card already, and it's very good. Look, you're paying 6 mana for a 4/4 flyer, so it's not a home run as far as that goes. But this card is, it's difficult to beat. It's also just weird. There's a lot of words that are like, wait, if my sources deal what? And then you have to figure it out. But it's basically whenever anything that your opponent controls does damage to you or one of your permanents, they take a damage. They're just taking a damage every single time that happens. If they attack you with their creature and, and you're like, no blocks. Okay, you take 3. Okay, you take 1. If you block with 4 creatures, you're taking 4 damage. It's just it piles on a lot of damage and makes it hard for your opponent to kill you unless they're doing it kind of in one fell swoop. Because the thing to remember here is that this is all triggered abilities. So if you can set up an attack such that you can get your opponent to 0, even if you're going to take even a lethal number of triggers from the Flameblade Angel, your opponent will be dead before those triggers resolve and you won't have to worry about it. But in any other scenario, it just piles up a ton of damage on you.
Yeah, Flameblade Angel's great. I'm not as lucky as you. I've only played against the card, not with it, and I lost very badly to it.
Yeah, well, I did too.
Just the fact that every time they chump block, you take a point. Every time any combat happens, you just take all this extra damage. It ends up being more similar to like a 7/4 flyer than a 4/4 flyer.
Yeah, and the cool part is that Flameblade Angel itself doesn't have to enter combat and risk dying. It just, if you have any type of board state, she just sits there kind of floating behind the scenes and piling up a bunch of damage. So I like the card a lot. The mana cost, makes me not, like if this costs 5 mana, I would have it, straight up A. As it sits, I have it in like A-, B+, and I'd probably just give it an A-. I do think the card's, kind of balmy and quite good.
Yeah, I like A- for Flameblade Angel.
What about Gyre Reach Bandit?
It's 2 and a red for a 3/2 haste human werewolf rogue. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform it into Vilden Pack Alpha, which is a 4/3 that says whenever a werewolf enters the battlefield under control, you may transform it. And it transforms back if anyone plays 2 spells.
Kind of cool. So
a fine card.
So what do you think about 3 mana, 3/2 haste that turns into a 4/3, as a werewolf?
3 mana, 3/2 haste that turns into a 4/3 is a card I will always play.
You always play it, right? It's not mind-blowing, but you wouldn't cut that from a red deck in any realistic scenario. So that's fine. So then the question becomes, all right, if we're going to put that at the C+-ish level, maybe a little higher, but something like that, how much bonus points does it get for whenever a werewolf enters the battlefield under your control, you may transform it?
Doesn't get a ton.
Not a lot, right?
It's just not going to come up all that often. Case. By the time you flip this, how many werewolves do you have in your hand? And it is funny, if you played 2 werewolves, you get to flip both, and they all reflip back because you played 2 spells. So
I didn't think about that. That's ridiculous.
Watch yourself. But the card is fine. I think Gyre Reach Bandit's like a C+.
Yeah, it's a bit of a reach, but I like C+ as well.
That was wordplay based on the name of the card.
I just think that it's fine enough as a 3/2 haste if you're looking to beat down.
Yeah.
Gold Knight Castigator. This is
an interesting one.
Scary card, kind of. With really weird stats, too.
Yeah,
right?
it's two... Well, not as weird once you think about it. It's 2 red for a mythic rare. It's a 4/9 angel with flying and haste. But anytime a source would deal damage to you or Gold Knight Castigator, double that damage. So...
Ouch.
It's essentially a 4/5. Because... For a lot of things that matter, yes, giving it -5 won't kill it because it's a 4/9. But if you deal 5 damage to it, it'll die because that'll be doubled to 10.
Mm-hmm.
If you deal 4 damage to it, it won't die because that'll be doubled to 8.
Okay.
So it's essentially a 4/5 flyer, and it halves your life total in terms of how much damage it takes to kill you.
Yeah. God, that feels risky. I mean, is this actually just a very good blocker somehow?
It kind of is, but if you're in a position where you're not attacking with your 4-power flying haste creature, it's
for 4 mana.
It can be pretty bad because they can just start throwing creatures into you, and dealing tons of damage. Like you have to block all their creatures, or you're taking a lot of damage because it's doubled.
But I mean, if they just start throwing creatures though, and you're blocking with your Gold Knight Castigator, aren't you just eating up their creatures?
Yeah, but if they attack
theoretically,
with 3 2/2s, you kill one and you take 8.
I see. If you don't have anything else going on, sure.
So it is. I would need to play with this card more. My assumption is that it's very good in an aggro deck. If you're the aggressor, this card's fantastic.
God, it's so good.
If you're a control deck, this is not the finisher you want. You just
is it the blocker?
But even then, I don't like it that much.
I don't think it's that good either.
Because if they get something through, it's just so bad for you.
Yeah.
And it makes like giant growths just wreck you. Like they cast the double strike +1 card on an unblocked 2/2, and you take 12.
It's also a source, right? It's not a creature,
right?
So like we just went over 2 fireballs.
Yes, if they burn from within you just die.
All right. Well, this card does seem very swingy. I agree with what you said. If you find yourself in a spot where your opponent's looking to shields up and block, you're going to pretty much wreck them with this card. It's quite difficult to get off the battlefield, and it does. Oh man, what if they put there's 2 enchantments that lock down creatures. They put the blue one or the
right.
The
if they put sleep paralysis or bound by Moonsilver on this card, then you did open yourself up to a huge liability.
Yeah, totally. So I don't know where to grade this card. I'm just going to give it a B because I don't know yet. But I love the all in nature of it, and I like the fact that it does kind of push you hard in one direction.
I'm going to say it's a B as well, but it's a split card. It's an A in an aggro deck and probably like a C or a D in a control deck.
Right. All right. So Gold Knight Castigator gets a B. Harness the Storm is 2 and a red enchantment. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may cast target card with the same name as that spell from your graveyard. I'm just going to say F here. This is so difficult to set up for such a minimal payoff.
That's more than just saying F. So I'm literally just going to say F.
Scourge Wolf is red for a 2/2 wolf horror. So great, a haunted wolf that's not a werewolf. It has first strike. So 2/2 first strike for red is fair, right? That's fine. Red's tough to pay. Like don't underestimate that. Not always going to come down on turn 2 for you. But it's got Delirium. It gets double strike if you've got Delirium. Card seems fine to me. I'm not blown away by it, right? It's okay.
It's kind of like Ash Zealot, if you remember that from Return to Ravnica.
Yeah, totally.
It's just a red 2/2 first striker with slight upside. Because by the time the Delirium is on, this isn't going to be like the biggest creature in play. Right. So it's going to be an upside, but not a huge one. But
right. And it's in a color that doesn't seem to particularly have a lot of ways to get Delirium going. It also just seems to be a card that wants to go into a deck that isn't, Delirium centric. So I view that as a relatively marginal upside. And again, the difference between this being 1 in a red and red is huge here. Because if you could just very reliably get a 2/2 first strike down on turn 2, that's a pretty good creature. You'd be like, sure. But the fact is that this is not going to be a turn 2 play, even if you've got, 2 lands in your opener all the time. So I'm not super big on Scourge Wolf. I think it's good though. I actually would just give it a C+. I don't even think it cracks the B range for me. I may be wrong about that. Maybe with enough combat tricks or something, this card just becomes a real pain in the late game, and it does crack into that like B- territory. But as it sits, I'm going to go C+ just because of the double red mana cost.
Yeah, I like C+ on Scourge Wolf. If it costs 1 in a red, it'd probably be a B-.
Yeah.
But you're a third of the games when you have this, you're just going to be able to not be able to cast it on turn 2.
Yeah, and it loses its luster pretty quickly too.
Yeah, for sure.
Sin Prodder is 2 and a red for a 3/2 devil with menace, which I already like that card quite a bit. We had that card at common.
Bogart Brute is
Bogart Brute. Yeah, so solid, and this one has a significantly nice upside to it. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Any opponent may have you put that card into your graveyard. If they do, then Sin Prodder does damage to them equal to the converted mana cost of that card. Otherwise, you get to put it in your hand. That happens every upkeep for no mana. It just triggers every upkeep. You're either doing damage or getting a card in your hand or putting a land in your graveyard, something, or, zero.
I see people calling this Rob, as in Bob. As in Bob, but Dark Confidant.
Yeah.
So if you reveal a land, they can pay 0 life to put it in your graveyard, essentially. But that does fuel Delirium, as minor as that may be. Mostly, this is a 3-mana, 3/2 menace with decent upside. It'll ping your opponent for a damage or 2 every other turn, sometimes more. So that's a fine card. That's a B.
That's a solid B to me. And I actually am going to go up a little on Sin Prodder. I'm actually going to give it a B+. I've played with and against it, and it really impressed me. It had a big effect on the game, and it was really, really annoying right away. Piling on damage by attacking and by its triggered ability, and forcing your opponent to make decisions that they don't really want to make. So I actually like Sin Prodder quite a bit, and for the easy cost of 2 and a red, I'm going to give him a B+.
That brings us to Wolf of Devil's Breach. This
card smashed me at the pre-release.
3 red for a 5/5 wolf. It's a mythic rare. So 5 mana, 5/5. Already pretty good.
Very good, yeah.
Whenever it attacks, you can pay 1 and a red and discard a card to deal damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to that card's cost. So this card, just very, very good. 5 mana, 5/5 that when it attacks, you get to turn one of the cards, spells, not lands, because it references mana cost, but turns one of the spells in your hand into a fireball for that much damage. It doesn't hit your opponent, but it kills one of their creatures.
And namely, whatever their best blocker is, so that your big, beefy 5/5 can keep attacking. The card's great. This to me is an A. It might be an A-, but even then, like, my opponent was doing madness stuff sometimes too, and I'm just like, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, Wolf of Devil's Breach is just a great
It's
card.
just an A, right? I mean,
you're also paying no costs here.
No. It's all a May ability. Yeah, I'm in for Wolf of Devil's Breach. All right, that's red. Let's move on to green. Cryptolith Rite is our first card. It is 1 and a green for an enchantment. It says, creatures you control have... tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Not interested, Luis. I don't like this card.
You just can't spend a card on this.
No, it's just not worth a card. It's that simple. Yeah. So I would give Cryptolith Rite an F, with the secret hope that I play it once throughout the course of the format and do broken things with it.
Yeah, I'll
less secret now. Deathcap Cultivator is 1 and a green for a 2/1 human druid that taps for either green or black mana. Nice. And it's also got Delirium. It gets Death Touch. Not a lot to hate here, right? Deathcap Cultivator, a reasonable, 2-powered body for 2 mana that can ramp you out, fix a little bit of your mana, and then later in the game, hey, after you've used it to power out, your 5 and your 6 mana spells, and it's kind of not doing much anymore, it might get Death Touch and trade for something bigger. To me, it's just like it's an upside party at Deathcap's house.
It is. It's a card you'd always play without. Even if it only tapped for green, even if it was called Leaf Gilder, you'd play the card. And
Leaf Glider, yeah.
Yes, it taps for green or black. And then later in the game, it gets Death Touch, and all of a sudden becomes a lot more relevant than a 2/1 would be otherwise.
Yeah, I like the card a lot. I'm trying to decide if I want to go B. I'm going to go B-. Maybe it's just a B. I'm going B. You know what, Deathcap Cultivator? You look like you need some lunch, but I'm giving you a B, buddy. Good job. What does Inexorable Blob do?
It's 2 into green for a 3/3 ooze, and it says... Delirium, whenever an Inexorable Blob attacks, put a 3/3 ooze creature token on the battlefield tapped and attacking.
That's great. Wow, this card's sweet.
Yeah, not much stops the blob. It's early game. It's a 3 mana 3/3. That's just a great
super solid.
And then late game, sometimes it'll be 2. The delirium part is actually not that exciting. It'll come up and it'll be relevant, but by the time you get delirium, it's not that hard for him to have like a 4/4, a 2/4, and a 2/2, and they can just double block and kill this blob, and then you're left with a 3/3. But still, it's a 3-mana 3/3 Nessian Courser with upside. This is just like, back-to-back core set cards with upside. So.
Yeah, no, that is true. And I think the key interaction here as well is that it's not making copies of itself, right? So if it attacks, if you block the inexorable blob, even if they have delirium and get the 3/3, then that stops it, right? Like they have the 3/3 left over, they got some value, but it's not like you're facing just like more and more blobs, right?
It's not going to go nuts very often. That's just not going to happen. But
okay. So you just need to make sure that you focus on blocking it. So it's not really as inexorable as it seemed, but
B for blob.
Yeah. All right. What does Sage? Oh, I know what this one does. What does Sage of Ancient Lore do?
But you just said you know what it does.
Yeah, it's great. Oh, for the benefits of our listeners, how about that?
All right. It's 4 and a green. It's a werewolf, and it's star, so its power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand. Again, this is dynamic. It moves up and down based on that number. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card.
Yeah.
And then it like other werewolves, flip if nobody played a spell, and it flips into Werewolf of Ancient Hunger. I like that.
Yeah, that's you.
Which is a
He's got a lot of burrito juice on his paws there.
Oh, yeah. Vigilance and Trample, and its power and toughness equal to the total number of cards in all players' hands.
Card's sweet, man.
I think it's good.
I've had it twice. It's very solid. Late game, look, you're going to get the card either way out of it, but you do have to be careful because if you have 0 cards, it'll die. Right? When it enters the battlefield, it triggers to draw a card. So
you make sure you don't attack with a 4/4 one of these. They block with a 3/3, and then you go land, and then it just dies.
Yes, that happens all the time.
People will have this card disappear from the battlefield on Magic Online. Trust me.
Totally. Yes, and you should make sure that your opponents, should keep it as well. But the other side of it is pretty scary. It's got Vigilance and Trample, and then that key twist of not cards in your hand, but all players' hands, which will usually give it another 2 to 3, power and toughness on top of whatever it was, at least in my experience so far. So I think the card's very solid. It's not on the bomb level that you see from some of the other cards, but I would give it a B+. The plus coming from the fact that you get a card for casting it no matter what. And that's great. I mean, geez, like this thing has the chance to be huge and tough to deal with. But in the scenarios where it's not, it's even feeding you back a card just for playing it as a cantrip. And I appreciate that a lot too. So I gave Sage of Ancient Lore a B.
I like
B+, excuse me.
I like B+ for Sage of Ancient Lore just because.
Give me that card.
I think one of the reasons this is one of the more hotly contested cards from the written set review was that people were like, how big is this actually going to be? Sometimes it's going to be like a 2/2 or a 3/3. It's like, 5-mana 3/3 draw card is a fine card.
Yeah, totally.
And this is on average going to be better than that because you can just not play your extra lands. You can, have your 4/4 or 5/5, and then if it flips, sometimes it would be like a 6/6 or a 7/7. Right. So I like Sage of Ancient Lore. I think B+ is right.
Yeah. Seasons Past is 4 green for a sorcery. This is a mythic. It says return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand. And then you put Seasons Past on the bottom of its owner's library. Oof. Interesting.
Yeah, the card is pretty good.
Is it good? I can't really tell, to be honest. Like, my initial impression is that it's cool but not good.
It's a finisher in the sense that Opportunity, 6-mana draw 4 is a finisher. This takes a little bit more work, but it's not that hard in a self-mill deck to do that. It's powerful, I guess is a better way of describing it. It's the high end of the range is very, very good. This
could draw even 5.
You could draw 5 or 6 cards off this. Wow. That wouldn't be impossible. But, just on average, like in a red-green beatdown deck, this card's unplayable.
Yeah. So this is going to go into a Delirium-based deck. And we've seen a lot of green cards that care about Delirium.
Yeah, Delirium or
like a Clue.
Or self-mill, some kind of like late game-ish. Okay. I'm going to mess around with the graveyard kind of deck. Also a decent sideboard card if you want to try to go over the top.
In a grind fest or whatever.
Right, yeah. This draws a bunch of cards. So that all like adds up to somewhere in the like
build around
C plus B minus level. Yeah, maybe just a build around B where if you can do the work and then use this as the way to win the game, this is the way you convert all that nonsense into an actual game win.
I love
Seasons Past is the way to do that. So build around B for Seasons Past.
Yeah.
Moves us to Second Harvest. It's 2 green instant For each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of it.
What do we get for third harvest? Because I'm not as interested in this one.
I would much rather have second breakfast. This is not not the kind of card you really want. When things are going poorly, it's just a straight 0. It does nothing. And even if things are going well, it doesn't necessarily mean you have tokens in play.
No, come on. If you wanted to press, I guess it would be build around, but I'm not building around it. So
I like F for second harvest. And if you're in the rare position where this card actually could be playable, if you have like 8 or 9 solid token makers somehow, I don't even know how, then you're still going to be the only person at the table who would possibly want it. So you will get it back.
Yeah, some commander player will probably take it from you. Silver for Partisan is next. It's 2 and a green for a 2/2 wolf warrior with trample. And whenever a wolf or werewolf you control becomes the target of an instant or sorcery spell, you put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. Yowza.
Yeah, this is the rare build around for wolves. It's a solid card. A 2/2 trample for 3.
Why does it have trample?
It's because you're targeting this with pump spells.
I see. So it's encouraging you to make it bigger, even if it's just temporary. That's cool.
Yeah. It's an interesting card. If you put this in a red-green deck with a bunch of combat tricks, you're going to have a good time. It's going to make a wolf or 2, and remember, it's when any of your creatures gets targeted that's a wolf or a wolf. So
would you play it if you had no way to target with instants or sorceries? Probably not.
If I'm on mono wolves, I probably would, just because if your opponent targets it, you still get a wolf. But
are you serious? If they kill it, you get a 2/2?
When a wolf or if you control becomes a target. So it has nothing to do with you targeting it. So
that's awesome.
I mean, if you have this card in your deck, you want a couple pump spells. And the decks where this is good tend to want pump spells anyway. But yeah, it has extra upside. If you play against a blue-black deck, I mean, granted, deadweight gets around it because that's not instant or sorcery, but a lot of the cards they would not want to target on your wolves will give you free wolves. So
B? B plus?
I like B minus for silver.
B minus, okay.
Yeah. You're not always going to get there. It's not quite a build around, but it's just a way to enhance your red-green decks or your green decks that have a bunch of pump spells.
Okay. Soul Swallower, 2 GG, so 4 mana for a 3/3 with trample. It's a worm, and it's got Delirium. You put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Wow.
It's a hill giant with trample that in the late game just starts just getting gigantic.
That's great.
That's a good card. Yeah, I like Soul Swallower.
That's really good.
I wouldn't build my deck around this card.
No, but you could.
It's a great addition to a Delirium deck. So, build arounds that are creatures that can die are a little sketchier. But the thing is, you're not paying much of a cost to put this in your deck. So I like Soul Swallower at B.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go a little. I'm going to go B+ on it. I like the fact that it's only 4 mana, and you're like one Vessel of Nascency away from just like making this thing into must-kill threat pretty quickly. I like it. Wow, Soul Swallower's that's really impressive to me, actually. I do wish it was a 3/4, just like a little better on its own, but whatever, I'll take it. What does Tireless Tracker do?
Tireless Tracker is 2 into green for a 3/2 human. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. You get a clue every time you play a land. And this is actually just straight up landfall, but they're not actually using the word landfall.
Yeah, that's right.
And it says, whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Great card.
That's awesome. God, you play a land and you get a clue.
It's a card drawing engine just by itself.
Totally.
Because every time you play a land, you get to spend 2 and draw a card at some point, not even right away, and then that'll draw into more lands and so on and so forth.
Once you've drawn 2 extra lands, now it's kind of free.
Right, and it makes up the time you spend cracking clues by making Tireless Tracker bigger and bigger. So you're not completely getting behind on board.
God, this card seems awesome. I will be playing a lot of.
I think Tireless Tracker is an A.
Do you think so?
The fact that you can play this on turn 3 or 4. First of all, you can play it on turn 3, turn 4, play a land and attack. Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're playing against. If you're playing against like white-green, you just play this turn 3. Turn 4, you can play a land and attack, and it's already threatening to be a 4/3. If you're worried about removal, you can play this turn 4. You can play this, then immediately play a land and automatically get at least a clue. But just the fact that it prevents you from flooding out and is still just an aggressively costed creature that soon enough becomes a 5/4 or a 6/5, that sounds great to me.
I'm with you. I think it's an A. The key here, right, is that it's sometimes you want to look at the peak power level and be like, this isn't exactly Avacyn here or whatever, but this is 3 mana. This is 2 and a green. Like it's very easy to get into your deck and on the battlefield and in a time when it matters. So yeah, I'm in on A for Tyler's Tracker. Traverse the Ulvenwald. Does not look like a vacation I'd like to take. It's a green sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. But if you've got Delirium, you can instead search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, and then shuffle.
Traverse is an interesting card because if you put this in an average deck, most of the time it's just going to get a land. You're not going to have Delirium all that often, but that means the opportunity cost is super low.
Because that actually isn't. I mean, you wouldn't go out of your way to play that card, but it's not the end of the world if you pay 1 single mana to go make sure you hit your land drop, right?
Definitely, it's just a fine card. And if it didn't have the Delirium text, if you were playing a deck that literally could not get Delirium, this card's pretty medium because in a 2-color deck, you're spending a green to fix your mana. That's just not great. It's okay.
It's just tempo low, but yeah, okay.
Whereas if you're playing a 3-color deck, all of a sudden gets a little more interesting. But where this card really starts to pop is when you're playing a deck that gets Delirium, reasonably often by turn 6 or 7, because then you're playing a land. So it's playing like an 18th or 19th land that later in the game turns into your best creature. That's a really powerful ability.
Okay, well, how do you grade this? I mean, you're kind of pitching it as being kind of free rolly, right? Like not literal free roll, but like it has more free roll to it than not.
That's the strength of this card. Is that even at 80% land, 20%, Eladamri's Call, that's still a great card.
You're still good with that. Okay.
Yeah. And
so how do you grade it?
Some decks in a deck where it's like I always have Delirium by turn 5. This card's an A. Because it's a split card land / your best creature. That's just a fantastic card. When you keep a 2-land hand with Traverse, then it's like keeping a 3-lander. Whereas if you draw 6 lands in a Traverse, by turn 5 or 6, then you get to go get your best creature. So that's fantastic. In a deck that can't really get Delirium, it's closer to like B- level. But I would say on average just a B. But in some decks, it's going to be really, really good.
Okay, I'll join you on B. I have one parting question for Traverse the Ulvenwald. How high do you see yourself taking it in a booster draft? Like it just doesn't have the feel of a pack one, pick one. Like, I got to Traverse, slam it.
If let's say I'm blue green in going into pack 2, and you've got a couple mill cards and a looter, and it looks like you're going to be drafting like the dirtily like Clue Delirium type deck.
Oh yeah.
Then I would take Traverse pretty high, especially if I had a bomb creature to go get.
Okay. Yeah, that's the big key, right? Obviously, you're taking the good creatures over it, but if you already had one, then you could take it. Okay. Last green card is Ulvenwald Hydra. This is a nice one. It's 4 green for a star mythic rare. It's a Hydra with reach. So the stars are equal, so the power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control. So, theoretically, you've already got 6 lands when you cast it since it costs 6 mana. And so you've got a 6/6 with reach, but it also has a triggered ability. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. So, most of the time you're looking at a 7/7 reach for 6 mana that ramps you up 1, maybe fixes you, and can get any land, by the way, if you happen to have... There's not a lot going on for lands in this set, but if you do happen to, be splashing or have a utility land of some sort, you can go search that up too. I mean, I just think this card's very solid, right? This to me isn't like the mind-blowing type card, because ramping from 6 mana to 7 mana when you're already at 6 is not particularly amazing. But a 7/7 reach for 6 mana is really good. I mean, that is just very difficult to attack through. And it's a nice attacker too. It's just huge, right? It has keyword big, and that matters. Also, as you've said earlier, Luis, these scale. Like you play a land the next turn, and now it's an 8/8, and you're rumbling. So I'm a big fan of Ulvenwald Hydra. Not really sure where to grade it, but I do have it quite high. I have it like A-, probably. It might be a B+, I don't know. But I could see myself first picking this and being pretty happy about it. So I'll say A- on the Hydra.
Yeah, I like A-. That's
I like Reach. Reach is good. Okay, so that's going to do it for green. Some really interesting stuff there. A lot of upside, too. A lot of low downside, high upside cards, even if maybe they're Their ultimate impact isn't quite as high as some of the other colors. All right, so let's get through gold here, and then we've got a few colorless cards, and then we're done. So Altered Ego is our first gold card. It has a very weird mana cost. It's
and
X.
Picture.
Yes, it has. The cost is X 2 green blue. Didn't know that rhymed. And it's a creature. It's a shapeshifter. So this is all just very strange. It can't be countered. And it says you may have Altered Ego enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it enters with X additional +1/+1 counters on it. So, it's a clone that costs 2 green blue. You can just do that. But then any additional mana that you want to throw in, any generic mana worth X, you can have it, those equal additional +1/+1 counters on whatever you happen to be copying at the time.
And most importantly, it can't be countered.
And it can't be countered, which is not that important.
This card is just fantastic.
He looks awesome.
It's incredible. It gives you not only the best creature on the battlefield, the actual best creature, because you're going to have a couple +1/+1 counters. The card is just absurd. So
I would say
Altered Ego is an A. It's worth splashing for. It's just there's no fail case besides the fact that it's a multicolored card, so it's a little hard to cast sometimes.
It's like the insecure, neighbor or something. They're like, I got one of those, but mine's slightly better.
Yeah. Or alternately, it's what everyone thinks about themselves, which is a couple +1/+1 counters greater than reality.
Anguished Unmaking is 1 white/black for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent. Holy crap. You lose 3 life. So it's not all fun and games with Anguished Unmaking, but my God, 3 mana, instant speed, exile target non-land permanent, just anything? Oof. I'm playing this one. The 3 life's real. Don't underestimate it, but that is not going to keep it out of my 40 card deck. I'll tell you that.
No, exile target non-land permanent really reads exile target creature. In limited. Yeah. There aren't that many planeswalkers, enchantments, and artifacts to get, but it's still, the card's great. It's just a 3 mana removal spell. It's not insanely better than that, and the 3 life is relevant. So I'll give Anguish Unmaking a B+.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to give it an A-. I just can't. That kind of flexibility, I just can't get away from. All right, next is a Planeswalker, Arlen Cord, and she costs 4 mana, 2 red-green for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. She's only got 2 abilities, but this is only half of the card. So on the front side here, Arlen has +1. Until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains Vigilance and Haste. And then she's also got a 0 ability. Put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield and then transform Arlen Cord. Arlen Cord becomes Arlen Embraced by the Moon. Looks a little grouchier on this side, which is a Planeswalker, same amount of loyalty as whatever she had from the other side, but she's got 3 abilities now. +1, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. That's all of the creatures you control. -1, Arlen Embraced by the Moon deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and then you transform her back into the front side. And then the ultimate is -6. You get an emblem with creatures you control have haste and tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Oof, lots going on with Arlen Cord here. The card's fantastic, right? Like, just get that out of the way right now.
Yeah, Arlen Cord's great.
Yeah, I would give Arlen Cord an A if you just want to cut to the chase. But there's a lot going on with this card. It's actually quite confusing. So let's just walk through really quickly here. So you can play Arlen for 4 mana +1.
Take this wolf for a walk.
You can give a creature +2/+2 and Vigilance and Haste until end of turn. Now that's up to a creature, so you don't even actually have to have a target if you just want to put Arlen Cord at 4 loyalty. But if you do, it's pretty sweet. You can make a creature that you have right now be able to attack now where maybe it couldn't before, and since it has Vigilance, it can sit back and block to protect Arlen. Also, if Arlen Cord is on the front side here, and you play a creature, you +1 Arlen on the new creature, and all of a sudden your board state looks way scarier than it just did, because you have this massive, hasty, trampling or vigilance creature, that just got +2/+2. Alternatively, you can pay the 0, keep her at 3 loyalty to put a wolf onto the battlefield. It's just a 2/2 wolf. Now, you don't get to use Arlen Embraced by the Moon that turn since you've already used the Planeswalker, but when you untap, you've got a 3 loyalty Planeswalker that can go to 4 to do the +1/+1 to all your creatures, or to go down to 2 to have it punch something and then flip back over. And then if you work your way up, you can eventually get to the emblem in some, scenarios. So the key here, I think one of the things that I want to focus on is the fact that you can't play Arlen and do the 3 damage to a creature player immediately, right? That you have to wait till the next turn just to be able to do that at all. So I would assume that if you're ahead on board, that you're going to default to playing Arlen Court and +1ing her to keep the damage flowing. And if you're at parity or behind, you're probably going to make a wolf.
My guess is you're just going to use the 0 the overwhelming majority of the time.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're ahead. The fact is, just getting the lightning bolt is the most powerful ability that isn't an ultimate. So
you want to get to that as soon as you can.
And getting material on the board. Getting a 2/2 is just a lot better than 2 extra damage. Yeah. So the normal play pattern with Arlen Court is play Arlen Court, make a 2/2. Next turn, lightning bolt your whatever creature I can kill. Next turn, make a 2/2. Next turn, lightning bolt. And then you start using pluses.
Oh, but you already won.
But individual games will have sometimes when giving vigilance and haste is better, or giving your whole team ++1 trample is better. So
yeah, but again, you'll probably just win at that turn, right? Like, I can just win instead, right? Oh, okay, I'll do that.
Arlen Court's biggest weakness is flyers. If your opponent has a 3/3 flyer in play, Arlen's like play Arlen +1 next turn +1 and then she dies.
And she's dead, yeah.
So that's the only hesitance that maybe she's not sort of E+ material. But I still think Arlen Court gets an A, but
yeah, I agree.
There are some situations where she's not unbeatable.
Next is called Fevered Visions. It's 1 blue-red for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. That means yours as well. So you play it, and on your end step, right away you draw a card. If that player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in hand, Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to him or her.
Yep.
I generally don't like cards like this, mainly because you're the one that has to pay the mana and the card out of your hand, and it affects both players simultaneously after that, so you're down a card in the transaction. I appreciate the fact that you get the card back a little sooner, like you're the first one to draw a card off of it, but I'm assuming you probably won't have a lot of mana to be able to use that.
But still, they don't get the card till the end of their turn, so it's not like they got to use an extra card on
I appreciate. I think that does bring it closer to something that I'm interested in. I think I'm still not interested in it, though. It doesn't recover from, like, if it said you draw a card when it enters a battlefield and then all this stuff happens, now I'm even on cards and we're both playing this little game where I get the upside of if you have too many cards in hand, you start taking damage, but you just never get that card back, right?
The question is how often this is going to deal 2 damage to your opponent. Because if this just said this text plus your opponent takes 2 damage a turn, the card would obviously be fantastic.
Yeah, I'd be playing that one all day.
But so how often can they empty their hand to the point where they're not taking the damage? And if they're playing an aggro deck, this card is not going to work out great for you. And if you're playing a slow deck, it's also not going to work out great.
Right, I was going to say, what if they're playing a control deck? They're probably fine with that.
No, if they're playing a control deck, this card I think is going to be pretty good against them.
I don't. Not unlimited. I think in Constructed, when people tend to have lots of card draw spells that keep their hand really big. In Limited, though, like, your control deck is still full of creatures. So you're just dumping your hand and keeping yourself, where you're not taking much damage from it and just holding like a couple of removal spells in hand.
You do also get to build your deck knowing you have this card. Like, bounce spells are a lot. When each player's drawing 2 cards a turn, bounce spells become very good because they're close to removal. And bounce synergizes with the other ability. You bounce a creature back and then they take 2.
Okay.
So, I don't know. The card is weird, and
it is. It's very difficult.
We're going to get more information on it as more people play it, but I can see a high upside on this card.
All right. So for me, if I had to put a grade on it now, I would give it an F. I don't think that this card is good, and I don't think you should.
You are going to change your tune on that. That I will bet.
Now again, I'm admitting that that's a temporary grade because I have to play with or against this card before I actually know. I just have to.
I'll start Fevered Visions I'll start it at C+, but I wouldn't be surprised if we both went higher.
Okay. Invocation of Saint Traft. What does that one do?
It's 1 white blue, 3 mana for an aura. Enchanted creature has, whenever this creature attacks, put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Exile that token at the end of combat. So it makes a creature into Geist of Saint Traft minus the hexproof part. Okay. That part's important. It also. It is. is a non-stat boosting aura. So if they have a 2/2 and you have a 2/2 and you play this card is horrendous. You attack, put an angel into play, then they block your 2/2 with their 2/2. They trade, they take 4, and then that's it. The angel goes away.
So you basically paid 3 mana to do 4 damage to them, maybe.
Yeah. Ugh. So I don't like this card. There are times, yes, think of it as like a +4/+0 enchantment, because you put this on one of your creatures, you can hit your opponent for an extra 4 every time you attack. And yes, sometimes it's slightly better because you end up getting that damage through even if they block the creature, but it doesn't make the creature any better. It doesn't make it any more likely to survive combat. So I think Invocation of St. Traft is a D. I think you have to have the most aggressive blue-white flyers deck that I've seen to really want to play this card. And even then, I don't even know if this is what you're looking for.
Well, yeah, and the big hitter, too, is that if you're behind or playing defense, this card just does stone nothing.
Oh, yeah, not a single.
It should give the creature hexproof. Let's get real St. Trafty up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like D for Invocation. There'll be a few times where you'll play it, but you'll probably generally prefer to keep it in your board. All right, what does Nahiri the Harbinger do?
She's 2 red-white. She's a planeswalker, so a mythic rare. Starts with 4 loyalty. She has +2. You may discard a card if you do draw a card. She has
-6 loyalty for a 4-walker. That's
a lot.
Mm-hmm.
-2, exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature.
Okay.
And then -8, search your library for an artifact or creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and then it gains haste and returns to your hand at the beginning of the next end step.
Which is actually in range, right? 4 +2, she's at 6. Next turn goes to 8, and then you could ultimate. I mean, if there was a win there. So the -2 does protect Nahiri sometimes if your opponent
right. If they just had a 4/4 and they attack you and then you go Nahiri, kill your 4/4, that's pretty good.
That's insane. Yeah.
If they've
got a 4/4 that's untapped.
Or 2 2/2s.
Right, or 2 2/2s. Yeah, I mean, look, I mentioned it earlier, Planeswalkers Unlimited tend to be very, very good, even if they're not the best Planeswalker you've ever seen. And I think Nahiri's a good Planeswalker, so like I think Nahiri's going to be very powerful and a card that you're going to want to take and run and splash for and all that stuff. But, you know, in the realm of Planeswalkers, I've certainly seen better than Nahiri.
Certainly. The fact that she doesn't do a great job against untapped creatures or multiple creatures, like she doesn't put a creature into play to protect her or, be able to deal with a creature before it attacks, is unfortunate. She's still a very powerful card.
Absolutely.
And it has a lot of loyalty.
Yeah, a lot of loyalty, 6 loyalty if you want on the turn that she comes down. The one little thing that I would consider as well, though, is, I would consider making an attack that you might not the turn before you play Nahiri to encourage your opponent to crack back at you if there's a creature that you want to kill.
Right. You'll sometimes attack with your 2/4 to get their 3/3 to attack you.
Exactly. And they might figure it out, but the fact that Nahiri's a mythic rare and going to show up so, rarely that you'll probably get them. That said, I mean, Nahiri's an A, an A-? Like these cards
still an A.
Just do so much work, right?
I mean, she's not all A's are created equal, but she's an A.
Yeah. Olivia, mobilized for war. Real mad. 1 black-red for a 3/3 flying legendary creature, Vampire Knight. She's a mythic rare, so 3/3 flyer for 3 mana. Boom, I'm in for that. And she's got another ability. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. It gains haste until end of turn, and it becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. That is a lot of punch in a little package here. That is ridiculous.
Yeah, 3 mana 3/3 flyer already is great.
Yeah.
And then you play Olivia, then you play a 4-drop, and then just smash for a ton of damage because you're getting a +1/+1 counter out of the discarded card, even no matter what. And then the haste is going to be relevant a lot of the times as well. Obviously, there's also some amount of madness enabling going on here, even though given that you have to play a creature first, it does cost a lot of mana. Still, Olivia's an A. Just a straight up A.
Just a straight up A, especially in an aggressive deck, but really, really in any deck. Prized Amalgam is 1 blue-black for a 3/3 zombie. And it says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. That is a mouthful. So it's rewarding you for having the zombies that you can pay some amount of mana to put them back on the battlefield, right?
It's rewarding you for that, or for using something like Ever After, or Yeah, that's mostly it, I guess.
It is a 3/3 for 3. Like, if you're in these colors, you're straight up always playing this card.
Right, that's the thing. Don't look at Prized Amalgam and say, like, man, this sucks compared to the other gold cards because it's next to all these, like, ridiculous gold cards. But just think about it as a blue-black 3/3 that sometimes has upside. Minor upside, but upside nonetheless.
Yeah,
so
it's fine.
I think that's a C+.
It's like a C+, right? Yeah. Wow, the artwork on this next one is sweet. Sigarda Heron's Grace. That is sick. 3 green-white for a 4/5 flying legendary creature angel at Mythic Rare. And it says, you and humans you control have hexproof. Now, you is the player, right? Sigarda does not have hexproof, but you do, and any humans you have do as well. And she's got an activated ability, 2 mana, exile a card from your graveyard. Put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. That's just any card. You can just chew through random stuff in your yard and start making soldiers for just 2 colorless or 2 mana, or however I'm supposed to say it now.
Oh yeah, the card is great.
Holy crap, that's a great card. The you and humans you control have hexproof isn't, a big draw, but 4/5 flyer for 5 mana is, and an engine that can just spit out, potentially 3 humans the turn after you play it is great. This Sigarda just seems fantastic to me. That just seems like a rock solid A.
Yeah, I actually like Sigarda at A+.
Oh,
just because by herself she can just win the game.
Mm-hmm.
And soon she's not by herself. Soon you've got a bunch of humans in play. 5 mana 4/5 flyer, already pretty good. That's already like B+, maybe even A- level, just because of 4/5 flyer is really big. The fact that you can make 2 to 4 humans a turn, especially in the late game, I don't know. It's really hard to imagine your opponent being able to punch through that with any sort of.
But I mean, you do need cards in your yard. Like, you're going to run out of those.
Yeah, that's just not that hard of a.
I mean, look, you might have 3 or 4 cards in your yard, and you use them up. It's not like just for the rest of the game you get to spew out, humans. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. Sigarda is amazing. A
is fine. I think that it's kind of immaterial. Or the difference between A and A+ is not a particular.
No, it's semantic, but it's fun. All right, another Planeswalker, Sorin Grim Nemesis. You got to preview this one, didn't you?
I did. So Sorin is 4 black-white, 6 mana for a mythic rare. He starts with 6 loyalty. Has +1, reveal a top card of your library and put it in your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its cost.
That's savage.
-X, Sorin deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life.
Okay.
And -9, you get a number of 1/1 lifelink vampires equal to the highest life total among players.
All right, I'm just going to ignore that, but my God.
Yeah, and Sorin is another A. Just you play Sorin.
Easy A.
You play Sorin, you beat. You eat one of their 4/4s, you gain 4 life, and then you start plussing Sorin, they lose life, you're drawing extra cards.
Yeah, and if you're at parity or ahead, then you just start drawing cards and killing.
Yeah, it also comes in at 7 loyalty if you Sorin +1. So yeah, Sorin's an A.
Easy A. Wow, what a great card. This next one caused quite a stir when it was previewed, and it's a really sweet one. It's called the Gitrog Monster, and it's a 3 black-green for a 6/6 frog horror. It's a legend. There's only one. It's got Death Touch, so 6/6 Death Touch for 5, thumbs up. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless you sacrifice a land. And then it also gives the ability of you can play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card.
Gitrog Monster's great.
Card seems sweet.
5 mana 6/6 Death Touch is absurd.
That is ridiculous.
And the only downside of this is that it sacks a land every turn, but that's actually not even downside because it cashes you out. It draws you a card every time you do that. Also, you get to go play this turn 5, play a land number 6 if you have one in hand because you get to play an extra land. Next turn, sack a land, draw a card, play a land. If you discard lands to other effects, because it's when it goes to the graveyard, not from anywhere, not from just play. You get to discard a land to draw a card. It's just overall just a great card. So Gitrog Monster, also an A.
Yeah, I loved the Gitrog Monster. It's the Gitrog Monster, Luis. How dare you just call it Gitrog Monster? Okay, so that's it for the gold cards. Let's see what we've got for colorless and lands. We've got Brain in a Jar. It's 2 colorless mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on Brain in the Jar, and then you can cast an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Brain in the Jar from your hand without paying its cost. And it also has another ability. You can pay 3 mana, tap it, and remove X charge counters from Brain in a Jar to Scry X.
This is not a card I intend
not seeing
to
a lot
play.
happening.
I mean, maybe I'll try, but it's just not one I would recommend.
It looks fun, but yeah, this is the type of card that, like, you know, put yourself in day 2 of a GP or at the Pro Tour sitting down. Brain in the Jar is just not going to be or Brain in a Jar is not going to be on your radar at all.
Yeah, definitely not.
I'm assuming it's just an F.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it is a fun card, but
it is cool.
I'll have to give Brain in the Jar basically an F. Like, there is some deck that can maybe take advantage of this, but it's so narrow. You have to draw your cards in the right order. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work.
No. Corrupted Graphstone is 2 colorless or 2 mana for an artifact. Corrupted Graphstone enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to choose a color of card in your graveyard and add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool. So we've got a little 2 mana rock that you can't use right away, and that you need to have a colored card in your graveyard to be able to tap for mana.
So it's kind of not a 2 mana rock.
It's kind of not at all.
Yeah, I really don't like this card. I also don't know why it's rare. That's kind of bizarre.
That is weird. Really feels like
I think Corrupted Graphstone's an F. Just don't put this card in your deck.
Yeah, it's just not reliable enough to make mana. Slayer's Plate. This card's nasty. It's 3 colorless for an equipment. Equip cost is 3, which is on the high end, but the creature gets +4/+2. So it makes your creature, whatever it's on, into something very, very big and threatening. And it says, whenever the equipped creature dies, if it was a human, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying.
So this card is fine?
I like it.
Oh, sorry. It is equipped 3. So it's 3 to cast, 3 to equip.
3 to cast, 3 to equip, and it gets +4/+2. And man, if you put it on a human, and even if the human dies, then you equip it to the to the spirit and turn it into a freaking dragon. It becomes a 5/3 that just crunches in right away. But Slayer's Plate's a major issue if you're playing humans, and even if you're not, I think the +4/+2 is probably enough to make it worth it.
Yeah, I think it's decent. I think this card is going to be overrated in general.
How come?
An easy way to lose a game is to play Slayer's Plate and then equip it, and then get your creature bounced.
Oh yeah, 3 and 3 is no joke.
And people are going to put this into every deck, not just human decks, because it just looks very appealing, and it's just not going to work out great in a lot of times. I think that's true. I think that you're going to end up, playing this and then equipping it onto your 2/2 zombie, and then having your opponent deal with it, and you're just going to be out so much mana. So the card is good, and in a human deck, it mitigates a lot of those risks, because once you've got it equipped onto a human, getting a 1/1 when it dies means that you're immune to a lot of removal, because you're fine getting the 1/1. Getting it bounced or sleep paralysis is not quite the same. That still gets you pretty badly. So I think put Slayer's Plate at B-, and I can see most people looking at this card and thinking it's like a B+ or an A.
Yeah, I was going to give it a B- as well, but I thought I was being generous with that, because I normally, shy away from relatively expensive equipment. But the bar for me is, well, how much better does it have to be, right? How much better does it have to be to get to the point where it's worth it to pay the mana? And this actually hits that bar for me. In a human's deck, not close, and not in a not-human's deck, it almost hits it. So close enough. +4/+2 just makes anything massive. And the thing is, while what you're saying is true, if they do kill those creatures, you could fall behind very quickly, paying this much mana, but they also have to deal with those creatures. If they don't, then this thing just kicks the crap out of them pretty quickly, and I like that a lot. So yeah, Slayer's Plate B-. Tamio's Journal. Oh god, are we just going off with this or what? 5 colorless.
Oh, that's the plan.
5 colorless for a legendary artifact, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, investigate. Just straight up get a clue token at the beginning of every one of your upkeeps, and then it taps and you can tap it and sacrifice 3 clues to search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library.
If this just
so slow.
if this just investigated every turn, I would not be super high on it, because you spent 5, then you have to spend additional chunks of 2 to get your cards back.
Mm-hmm.
But having the ability to demonic tutor with 3 clues, I think is very good. What it does is, so you play Tamio's Journal at some point, and some of the games you're just going to be cracking the clues every turn or every other turn to get more cards and play your spells and whatnot. Sometimes you're just going to wait a turn or two, not crack the clues, and then just tap the journal, spend no additional mana, and this is the key part, to go get whatever you need out of your deck. And especially if you, let's say, already had a clue in play. So you had a clue in play from an earlier card. You play Tamio's Journal. Next turn you get a clue. You just play your normal spell. The turn after that, you get another clue off the journal, and then you tap it and you go get a good removal spell or your best threat. I think that makes up for itself because it keeps on going after that too.
It does. Yeah. You know, when I see a card like Tamiyo's Journal, right, the downside jumps out at you. It doesn't do anything. You play 5 colorless and you say go. Nothing happens. Then on your turn, you get to investigate for free. But then you're still paying the 2 mana to get the card. I mean, that is very low impact as far as immediacy goes. But what it gives you is inevitability. Like, the longer the game goes that you have Tamiyo's Journal out, the better your chances of winning that game go. So if you have a control deck that can really lock down the game and has all the tools to win, but you just need that engine to power you, to put yourself over the top of what your opponent's doing, Tamiyo's Journal could be it. Again, it's a card that you have to play very carefully because it does so little immediately. But over the course of a longer game, it will take over and win the game for you. Period. It just says at some point, it just says draw an extra card on your upkeep, and your opponent's not going to be able to keep up with that. So you need to know where this goes and when, because if you're trying to beat down, Tamiyo's Journal doesn't look very good. And if your deck isn't great at making that long game happen or whatever, then Tamiyo's Journal doesn't look as good either. But in that one scenario, I would play this. I think it's actually good for that. And like you said, being able to search things up without paying mana so that you can get the answer you need for their big bomb or go find your big bomb to win the game with is powerful. That's real. That said, I do have a hard time giving Tamiyo's Journal a really high grade. I think it is pretty narrow. I don't think that every deck wants it necessarily, even though it's colorless.
All my decks do. Yeah,
all your decks do, and probably most of mine. But, I think some of our listeners might draft some decks that really don't want it. I don't know what to grade it. In reality, it's probably like a D, right? Like,
no.
I mean, it's a card that you just aren't going to play all the time and has such low impact that there's a lot of decks that don't want it or can't play it. But then the decks that do, it's fantastic. It is inevitability in the form of one card that's quite difficult to interact with. So A?
I would give Tamiyo's Journal a B-. And that
really?
is, I think that's because as a win condition in a slower deck, it's going to be close to a B+, and it's going to be closer to like a C in a lot of other decks. Okay. Thing is, you can just put this in your deck as if you don't have much high end, and this gives you a good late game plan.
It does.
So I'm going to give Tamiyo's Journal a B-. I think in sealed, it's probably closer to like a B+. I think in the average control deck, it's going to be closer to a B+. And I think aggro decks it's going to be like a D or an F. But a lot of mid-range decks, I think the card's going to be fine in.
Yeah, I don't know what to give it. I'm going to give it a C.
All right,
that
works.
That's me punting, basically. Anyway. I love the card. I feel bad giving it a C, but I'm going to for now. And I'm probably going to play it every time I open it, I'm taking it. Like, I'll tell you that right now. Yeah. So we've got a cycle of lands that we'll cover in one fell swoop here. Nothing super interesting for limited. They're dual lands that tap for,
allied colors.
The allied colors, like the first one's called Choked Estuary, and it taps for blue or black. And it says, as it enters the battlefield, you may reveal an island or swamp, since this one taps for blue or black, from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. And there's one of these for each allied color pair. This is the only gold cards we saw there are like mythics, right? Like there's a few rares and a few mythics. So, as a splash, maybe you would like one of these. Maybe you want one for, your standard deck or whatever. But these aren't, I don't think going to be much of a high priority in draft at all or in sealed.
No, if you're both the colors, you'll take this over like a marginal playable or medium playable. And if you're splashing a third color, this is not a 3-color format, but there's so many powerful gold cards. Like I played blue black splashing Gitrog Monster. Or if you're like, black green, you'll splash Sorin Grim Nemesis, that sort of thing.
Totally.
So if you're in a 3-color deck where you want to splash, these lands go up in value a little. But overall, these are just C's. You're not going to take
C.
You're going to take them over other C's if you have enough playables. They bump up to C+ at that point. Early in the draft, you'll probably just take other C's, and then that's about it. The upside of these is not super high.
No. Couple more lands here. One is called Drownyard Temple. It's a land. It taps for colorless, and you can pay 3 mana and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I don't see a big upside to that in limited. I could see a scenario where you like mill it from yourself and then get it back, but I'm kind of like, so what? Like that doesn't seem too great to me.
It's fine. If you're like a blue-black discard deck, self-mill deck, and your mana is going to be okay, then you should put this in your deck because sometimes you'll just get to get it back for free. you'll discard it or mill it, and then if you have extra mana, it is value. But
I mean, is your mana going to be okay if you put this in there? Like, I'd rather just put another island in.
If you're playing 18 land and you can go like 9/8/1, that's okay. Because the upside of putting this into play on turn 4 or 5, if you've got like a 2-drop to play as well, that is good.
Is it? I just feel like I'd rather have another colored mana source.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a lot of ways to get this in your graveyard for free, but if you do, then I think the card has a significant upside.
Okay.
So that leads
I'd give it a D, but
yeah, I think it's a D, and sometimes you'll want to play it, but most of the time you won't.
All right, one last card. This one's not a D.
Oh no.
Westvale Abbey is it taps for colorless, and it enters the battlefield untapped, so it's just not a huge downside. Especially when you compare it to what you get for the upside. So you can pay 5 mana, tap it, and pay a life to get a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token. So this is a land that you can, for 6 total lands tapped, make a 1/1. So it's just start engineering out little 1/1 humans. And it's got the other ability, which is pay 5, tap it, and sacrifice 5 creatures, and you transform Westvale Abbey and then untap it. So you're going to get what it transforms into as an untapped creature, which is Ormondal Profane Prince. And this thing is a 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. Hello. That's GG. So this Westvale Abbey is insane. I've played against it, and it's just the scariest card. Because if you're in any type of situation where you're not actively pressuring your opponent's life total and they have a Westvale Abbey, they're either playing creatures or they're just tapping it and making 1/1s, and you're just like, tick-tock, because it's only a few more turns before Ormondal shows up, and that card is absurd. I mean, that's just insane and incredibly difficult to beat as an indestructible creature on top of all that other stuff.
So it's kind of funny. If you put Westvale Abbey in your deck, you're not going to make Ormondal all that often, but you'll win almost every single game where you do.
Yep.
And you're not paying very much of a cost for that upside. Like if the upside is a 10 out of 10, the cost you're paying is very, very, very low, even if you only get that upside once every like 5 games. So
totally.
And sometimes you're going to pay 5 and tap and pay a life and make a 1/1, and you're not ever going to flip the Abbey, but you're still just going to get a 1 or 2 1/1s out of the deal when you have nothing better to do. This is just a classic case of opportunity cost being very low and upside being very high. So totally. I think Westvale Valley is an A.
I do too.
It's just don't assume you're going to win every game by putting this in your deck. It's more like this deck will rarely cost you much, or this card will rarely cost you much, but could win a game single-handedly.
God, it only takes a land slot. So yeah, I like Westvale Abbey as an A, and that will do it. That is all of the Rare and Mythic Rares from Shadows over Innistrad. Set looks absolutely fascinating. I love the note that they hit on most of these rares, and I mean, this was one of the reviews, I think, since you and I have been doing the show together, Luis, where we had a lot of, I don't really know, right? Or where does this fit in? We'll have to find out. And some real stumpers here about, exactly where some of these weird enchantments and stuff go in. And I'll tell you what, I am very eager to get my hands on these cards and try out a lot of them so that I can report back and we can start making our adjustments. And we'll, of course, be talking about that on future episodes of the podcast. That is going to do it, though, for this Shadows over Innistrad Rare and Mythic Rare set review show. I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by Channel Fireball. You want to go to Channel Fireball if you want to get better at Magic. That's why you're here. We know it. That's why you come listen to the show every week, is to get better. And Channel Fireball cares about getting you better at Magic. So if you want to find a bunch of awesome free content, free, 100% free, you show up, you go to the website, and it's free. You can watch videos, read articles, podcasts, all that kind of stuff by some of the best players in the world, all with the goal of your improvement at Magic. You can find that at Channel Fireball, as well as a full selection of singles. You can sell your cards back to them. Heck, they've got Limited Resources t-shirts in stock now, where you get a pin and a sticker for free with those, and an LR pin and sticker as well. All different types of stuff. You can find it all at Channel Fireball. Please do show them some love as they've shown the show love as well, and we appreciate it. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. If you want to find anything related to the podcast, it's all at lrcast.com. You can find the Facebook group, the Facebook page, you can find the LR subreddit on Reddit, you can find the YouTube channel, which has been picking up a bit since I've been doing those depth check videos. I've been getting good feedback on those. Thanks for the people that helped me get the feedback and get the reviews, or the critiques and stuff going.
You misspelled it today when you tweeted it.
Oh no, what did I do?
You spelled it like derp check or something.
God,
So that's why I responded to you like classic derp check videos because you just.
Great. I didn't actually see that yet. Wow, yeah, that's embarrassing. I was doing other things and I was on my phone, so I'm not shocked to hear you say that. But yeah, so the review of my tweet not so good, but the videos have been doing all right. So anyway, you can find all that on lrcast.com. Thanks so much, as always, for hanging out with Luis, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little Magic with us, and we'll see you next week.
So it's funny that we had a conversation about pronunciation earlier because, a couple months ago, I gave you a pronunciation quiz, and, given that you are, Marshall, the arbiter of pronunciation for the Magic community, I feel like it's important that everyone hears your instructions on how to pronounce cards.
Okay. So I never called myself that, by the way.
The self-proclaimed arbiter.
No, it's just wrong.
So let's start with the 3/4 lifelinking vampire that gets you a 2/2 zombie every time a creature dies. How would you pronounce this, gentleman?
Well, I don't know what it's called. I don't know what the card is.
Trader to get?
I was thinking from Shadows. I'm sorry.
No.
Colorless. That's official.
It is now official.
It is. I had it cleared. I'm not kidding.
Because I was told it was Kalitas, and in fact,
that is the actual original. But I made an appeal that the community had, usurped the original name, and that Colorless was what everybody called it, and that we would actually sound weird for calling it Kalitas. So Colorless it is.
It's the Sylvan Caryatid of vampires, since that was Caryatid for a while.
No, yeah. All right.
All right, this is a hot contention, especially for people who play Modern. What is the 1/1 hexproof for 1 green/blue hybrid?
That is Slippery Bogle.
Not Bogle.
No, it is Bogle.
I actually ran a poll to figure out what people called the deck, and it was like 50-50. It was like 53-47 in favor of Bogles versus Boggles.
It's funny because I on air I will call the deck Boggles because when I see people write the deck name, they put 2 G's in it, and I'm like, well. That's Boggle. It's not what the card's called.
I'm going to go with Bogle now just because it was the winner, even if it was not very much, because no matter what, you're not going to get it right.
Right.
All right.
I mean, Bogle's a word,
I know. That's what it's supposed to be. Bogles.
Yeah. It means like a goblin or like a little.
It's only Boggles because that's just the word everyone assumed it was, because
right.
Bogle's so close to a word. That's where you get in trouble.
Yeah.
All right, what about the enchantment that flips into a 4/4 trample hexproof? We had a bit of a debate about this last week.
So this is autumnal. I listened to this many times, and then I can't remember the next word.
To verify that I said it correctly.
You did say it correctly. I was actually listening to the what's it called? So I was told probably 40 times after the show how to pronounce it. I had looked it up immediately after online, but yeah. Yes.
Which I feel bad.
I was told 3 seconds after saying it and about and a couple hours after saying it about 20 more times.
So just to be clear, it is autumnal gloom.
Yes, autumnal.
All right.
Which is a word I'd never seen before, by the way. I thought you were trolling me. Like this is I blame you for that.
See, this is the problem. This is the problem is that people, yourself included, now assume I'm being sarcastic or kidding or trolling.
Yes, of course. It's self-defense.
When I'm just offering good actionable advice.
God, good guy, Luis. All right.
All right. The last card we've got is 2 and a blue for a 2/2, and then when it hits your opponent, it transforms. The uninvited
Geist.
I think it's supposed to be guest because that's what the joke is.
Because that's funnier.
So I will be calling this card uninvited guest in case you are not.
Well, I will not, as the arbiter of whatever.
All right, so we've got Colorless, Slippery Bogle, Autumnal Gloom, and Uninvited Guest. Those are the Marshall sanctioned approved pronunciations.